Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Today we're diving into the events of the fifth book in the Harry Potter series, Order of the Phoenix, and more specifically, the formation and uniqueness of Dumbledore's army. This rebellious alliance of teenagers was not just an act of defiance, it became a true symbol of heroism. Yet many of the book's most compelling moments never made it to the big screen. Let's explore together which important and fascinating details were left behind. Enjoy the video. Number 1. Fred and George's departure. In the movie, this scene feels like a quick flash, bright but fleeting. In the book, however, their departure marked the peak of their personal protest against Umbridge's regime. They didn't just fly off on broomsticks, they plunged Hogwarts into glorious chaos. Swamps, fireworks, wild magic, and as the cherry on top, Peeves, who, inspired by their rebellion, stepped up his mischief. This spontaneous uprising lasted for weeks and became a symbol of resistance for the rest of the students. In the film, a few minutes of spectacle, and that's it. Number 2, the sign-up list. In the film, students casually write their names on parchment as if it's just a formality. But in the book, Hermione was far more clever. She enchanted the sign-up list with a jinx. If anyone betrayed the group, the consequences would be visible. The traitor's face and ears would break out in painful boils. It wasn't just magical protection. It was psychological warfare. The fear of being exposed worked flawlessly. Number 3. How did they know when to meet? In the movie, it's never really explained how students coordinated their meetings. What, did Harry send everyone owls or yell across the Great Hall? Thankfully, the book gives us the answer. Hermione used the Protean charm to enchant fake coins. Whenever the time and place of the next meeting changed, the coins would warm slightly, and the new details would appear on the edge. This level of magic was part of the NEWT exams, and Hermione mastered it in 5th year. Brilliant, as always. Number 4. The Room of Requirement. In the film, Neville stumbles across this mysterious room by accident, but the book gives us a more logical backstory. Dobby the house elf actually told Harry about it. Yes, the same Dobby the movies gradually erased from existence. The Room of Requirement would appear when someone genuinely needed it, taking on whatever form was required. It became a lifeline for the army, a shelter from Umbridge, and a space for real training. Number 5. The Hog's Head. The movie skips over the very first meeting of the army. In the book, it takes place in a shady little pub, the Hog's Head, chosen by Hermione on purpose so no one would eavesdrop. The atmosphere was fitting, dusty, dark, full of whispers and suspicious characters. One of them was Mundungus Fletcher, disguised as an old witch who later leaked information. Behind the bar stood Aberforth Dumbledore, Albus's brother, quietly observing the future heroes and later passing along the details to his brother. So many rich details were simply cut from the screen version. Number 6. The name, and finally to the name Dumbledore's army. It wasn't just something fun Ginny Weasley came up with, it was a deliberate jab at the Ministry of Magic. At the time, Minister Fudge, gripped by paranoia, believed Dumbledore was forming a secret army. Ginny thought if we're going to be accused anyway, why not make it real? Ironically, that name would later be used against them. It became the very reason for Dumbledore's forced removal when Umbridge discovered the sign-up list with the bold title, The Ministry So Feared. Number 7. Quidditch and the Dumbledore's Army. Quidditch didn't just disappear from the 5th film, it was erased. But in the book, it pulses through the story like a second heartbeat. After Harry is banned from the team by Umbridge, it's Ginny who steps up as Seeker. No one expects her to shine, but she does. Fast, fearless, and sharper than anyone imagined. "She's better than you are," Ron mutters, half-joking. And Harry, watching from the stands, realizes she's been practicing in secret for years. That moment changes everything. Ginny isn't just Ron's little sister anymore. She's a force. Ron, too, finds his spotlight. As keeper, he's shaky at first, nervous, self-doubting. But his friends support him, especially through his worst games, and when he finally wins a match, the roar of the crowd is more than applause. It's validation for him, for his place, for the idea that every member of Dumbledore's army isn't just fighting in secret, they're growing in public, building trust, becoming more than they thought they could be. The Quidditch pitch becomes another battlefield, not against Death Eaters, but against fear. Number 8. Umbridge's decrees. Dolores Umbridge didn't just impose rules, she built a prison out of parchment. In the book, her control came not through magic, but through decree after decree from the Ministry. Educational Decree number 24. Banned all student organizations not approved by her personally. Another outlawed gatherings of more than 3 people without permission. Students couldn't meet, couldn't read what they wanted, and eventually, as Filch whispered gleefully, they could barely go to the bathroom without filing a request. The walls closed in, the library had entire sections sealed off, the school newspaper was censored, Quidditch matches were postponed or cancelled. When Fred and George tried to test their fireworks, Umbridge banned all joke products. And she didn't stop there. She formed the Inquisitorial Squad, giving Slytherins like Draco Malfoy official power to punish other students. Fear spread like fog. Any student found in possession of the Quibbler will be suspended. That line came after Harry's interview with Rita Skeeter. She wasn't just punishing behavior, she was silencing truth. The film shows the pink office and the terrifying quill, but it only hints at the scale. In the book, Umbridge's reign is suffocating. Every week brings a new law. Every hallway echoes with paranoia. And that's what made Dumbledore's army not a club, but a rebellion. A necessary, desperate answer to a school that had stopped being safe. The Room of Requirement became more than hidden stone walls. It became their last free space. Number 9. Snowfall in the Room of Requirement. It was supposed to be just another training session. But when the members of Dumbledore's army entered the Room of Requirement before Christmas, they found something magical. The ceiling was covered in enchanted mistletoe, golden baubles floated in mid-air, and best of all, snow fell softly from above, vanishing just before it touched the floor. It was Dobby's doing. The little elf had taken it upon himself to decorate, proud and excited to help Harry Potter's army. The room glowed with warmth, a flickering candlelight magic no spell could create. In that enchanted snowfall, something changed. The fear faded for a while. Students who came to train in silence now laughed, shared stories, passed around sweets from honeydukes. It was the first time many of them had felt peace that year. Cho kissed Harry under the mistletoe. Neville smiled more than he spoke. Even Zacharias Smith didn't complain, for once. That night, the Room of Requirement didn't just provide a place to learn, it became home. And the snow, so light and silent, reminded them that joy was still possible. The movie erased it. No snow, no mistletoe, no warmth, just a hard-edged training montage. But in the book, that moment of quiet beauty mattered. Dobby had decorated the place like a miniature great hall, the book reads. And in doing so, he gave the army something no adult ever could, a reason to believe that together they were safe, even if only for one snowy night. Number 10. Trelawney's dismissal. It happened in front of the whole school. Sybil Trelawney stood in the courtyard, trembling, suitcases scattered, eyes wild with fear. Professor Umbridge had just sacked her. No warning, no mercy, just cold authority backed by a new educational decree. Trelawney, who had lived inside Hogwarts for years, was being thrown out like a stray. Students gathered in silence. Some stared, some looked away. And then, through the crowd, came Dumbledore. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't threaten, he simply walked up, placed a firm hand on Trelawney's shoulder and said, "You are not leaving this castle, I am not allowing it." That one sentence shattered Umbridge's power for a moment. She had fired a teacher, yes. But Dumbledore reminded her that she could not take away the home. The castle was under his protection, and as long as he remained headmaster, No one would be cast out in shame. For Dumbledore's army, this moment was a spark. Until then, they had trained quietly, avoiding attention. But watching Umbridge humiliate a teacher, watching her try to crush one more soul under the weight of rules, it pushed them further. They saw the true cruelty of the ministry. They saw that this wasn't just about lessons. It was about dignity, justice, courage. That day, the Dumbledore's army became more than a student group. It became resistance. The film cuts all of it. No courtyard, no suitcases, no trembling Trelawney. It robs the audience of a moment where the school truly came together. Students and staff, united by quiet defiance. In the book, this scene is not just about prophecy, it's about protection, loyalty, and the kind of strength that doesn't need a wand to make an impact. Number 11, Neville Longbottom's growth. Neville Longbottom wasn't just background noise in Order of the Phoenix. The book gives him a heartbeat, a story. In the films, he's timid, forgetful, almost comic relief, until the very end. But in the Dumbledore's army, Neville begins to rise. At first, he struggles. He waves his wand clumsily. His spells sputter, but he refuses to quit. Every meeting, he stays longer. He practices harder. Neville was improving fast now, the book says, working relentlessly. There's a moment, simple but unforgettable, when Neville stuns himself with his own spell. A flash of red light, a surprised yell, and he hits the floor. The room goes silent, then laughter, gentle and proud, because it means he did it. He actually did it. In that instant, Neville proves to everyone, and maybe for the first time to himself, that he's not weak. He just needed a place to grow, a place without ridicule, a place like Dumbledore's army. His determination doesn't come from pride, it comes from pain. His parents, tortured into madness by Bellatrix Lestrange, lie in St. Mungo's hospital, unable to recognize him. They were very brave, he tells Harry. And though he never says it aloud, it's clear. Neville is trying to live up to them. That's why he trains harder than anyone. That's why by the end of the book he's no longer the boy who forgets passwords. He's the boy who charges into battle. The film forgets this, it skips the journey. But the book shows us every stumble, every win. When they fly to the Ministry, Neville insists on going. When they fight the Death Eaters, he refuses to back down, even with a broken nose and a bleeding face. In Dumbledore's army, Neville finds what he's been missing his whole life. Not just courage, but purpose. Number 12. Journey to the Ministry of Magic. The journey to the Ministry of Magic in the film is over in seconds. One moment they're in Hogwarts, the next they're in the Department of Mysteries. But in the book, the way, there is a trial in itself. The 6 students, Harry, Hermione, Ron, Luna, Ginny, and Neville, have to find a way to London without being caught. They use thestrals, winged, skeletal horses invisible to all but those who have seen death, a symbol of trauma and growing up. Not everyone could see them. Harry could, so could Luna and Neville. That detail alone speaks volumes. Flying to London on the backs of silent, eerie creatures is not a heroic moment. It's quiet, cold, uncertain. Harry is filled with doubt. What if this is a trap? What if he's leading his friends to death? What if I'm wrong? He asks himself again and again. But they come anyway, not because they believe the plan will work, but because they believe in him. "We're with you, Harry," says Hermione without hesitation. That kind of loyalty can't be faked on screen. It's built over chapters of trust. The thestral flight is terrifying. Ginny clings to her mount. Ron is silent, pale. Neville doesn't complain, not once. None of them are sure if they'll make it, but they push forward anyway. This moment is about more than travel. It's about crossing a line, from students to soldiers, from safety to war. They are no longer children playing at rebellion. They are risking their lives, not because someone asked them to, but because it's right. The film gave us a hallway and a few lines of dialogue. The book gave us fear, growth, and silence filled with courage. Rowling didn't rush it. She let the flight stretch out like a heartbeat before battle. The thestrals, ghostly and calm, are more than transport. They are symbols of the price already paid. and the price yet to come. Number 13, why Cho told about the Dumbledore's army. In the Order of the Phoenix film, Cho Chang appears to betray Dumbledore's army. She is shown giving away the location of the room of requirement to Dolores Umbridge. But that's not how it happened in the book. In truth, Cho never revealed anything. It was her friend, Marietta Edgecombe, who exposed the group. Cho simply brought her along to one of the meetings. Marietta, under pressure from her mother, who worked for the ministry, later told Umbridge everything. But Hermione Granger had planned ahead. She had enchanted the sign-up parchment with a jinx. Anyone who betrayed the Dumbledore's army would be marked. When Marietta talked, the magic took effect. The word sneak appeared across her face in angry purple pustules. The mark was humiliating and refused to fade. It was a brutal yet effective layer of magical security. As Hermione said matter-of-factly, "It's completely foolproof. I got the idea from a spell I found in the Standard Book of Spells Grade 6. Cho, meanwhile, was caught in the crossfire. She wasn't the traitor, but she was seen defending Marietta. Her heart was already heavy. She had lost Cedric Diggory. The trauma of his death haunted her. She liked Harry, yet every moment between them reminded her of what she had lost. Cho's loyalty was split between her feelings for Harry and her obligation to a lifelong friend. It was a quiet, human conflict that couldn't be resolved with magic. The film ignored this complexity. It simplified the story. Cho was made the scapegoat, a convenient way to stir Harry's anger and move the plot forward. But the book gave her nuance. She was not a villain. She was a grieving teenager, trying to navigate loyalty, loss, and love. That's what made her story meaningful. It wasn't about betrayal, it was about pain. Number 14, who was the best in the Dumbledore's army? When the Dumbledore's army formed under the flickering shadows of Room of Requirement's enchanted torches, it wasn't just a rebellious act of defiance, it was a revelation of hidden strength. Harry may have been the instructor and Hermione the brain behind the logistics, but what unfolded was something far greater than just their combined leadership. The DA became a crucible where quiet strength was forged and unexpected talents flared into brilliance. In that tightly knit group of students, bravery wasn't measured by reputation, but by how one faced fear, and the story that unfolded was far more layered than even Harry could have expected. Ginny Weasley, often overshadowed by her older brothers, emerged as one of the fiercest and most instinctive duelists. She wasn't merely a quick learner, she moved with a kind of unspoken confidence, almost as if the wand answered her emotions directly. Her use of Expelliarmus during practice sessions struck even Harry, who noted how effortlessly she disarmed her opponent. She's good, he thought, not just with surprise, but with a hint of pride. Ginny had a natural grasp of combat magic, combining agility with intensity. In truth, her power was not only in her spells, but in her resolve, years spent listening, watching, waiting her turn, and now, finally, stepping forward into her own. But Ginny wasn't the only one who quickly carved a place for themselves among the top. Anthony Goldstein, though quieter in demeanor, displayed a scholarly precision that gave his spells an eerie consistency. He was not flamboyant like others. His wand did not crackle with showy magic, but every time he cast a jinx or a shield, it struck true. Anthony, a Ravenclaw prefect and a cousin to Quentin Trimble, had a mind that processed magic through logic. Yet, despite his academic roots, he never hesitated to join the chaos of practice duels. He proved that tactical thinking could be just as powerful as raw emotion in magical combat. Even Blaise Zabini, though not often mentioned in the core group, had his moment of quiet triumph. During one particularly tense session, when dueling partners were randomly assigned, Zabini faced Seamus Finnegan and countered 3 of his curses with grace and minimal movement. His style was elegant, almost detached, but lethal. Though he later drifted away from the DA's ideological core, those who watched him duel couldn't help but acknowledge that his talent was undeniable. That brief glimpse of controlled fury revealed how magic, when paired with self-assurance, could unsettle even the boldest opponents. Still above all the sparks and counters, one name rose with the slow, undeniable weight of someone who was reclaiming not just skill, but a sense of self. Neville Longbottom, the boy once ridiculed for forgetfulness and clumsiness, transformed before everyone's eyes. He began the sessions as the underdog, wand trembling, voice hesitant, but week after week something inside him changed. His spells grew sharper, more accurate. His back stood straighter. It wasn't just training that forged him, it was purpose. The pain of knowing his parents had been left broken by Bellatrix Lestrange was no longer a wound, it was fuel. Neville's journey wasn't just touching, it was awe-inspiring. During a late-night practice, when Harry introduced the shield charm Protego, Neville struggled at first. But when Zachariah Smith mocked his failed attempts, a quiet fury lit in Neville's eyes. The next time the shield exploded from his wand with such force that it knocked Smith off his feet. Everyone turned in stunned silence. It wasn't luck, it was something buried deep in Neville's heart, finally waking up. "He's got more determination than anyone else in here," Harry admitted once, and those who trained beside Neville never forgot that. There was another night, colder than most, when they practiced in pairs against multiple opponents. Hermione organized the exercise to simulate a real ambush. Neville, paired with Luna Lovegood, was surrounded by 3 attackers. Instead of panicking, he took the lead, using Stupefy with surgical precision, shielding Luna and disarming 2 attackers in less than 30 seconds. In that dim-lit room, filled with echoes of spells and laughter, Neville stood like a soldier. Not a boy pretending, but someone becoming. Hermione Granger herself was no less remarkable. While she was not always the flashiest duelist, her mastery of magical theory meant she could adjust and perfect her technique faster than anyone. When Harry demonstrated Levicorpus and Reducto, Hermione didn't just replicate them, she refined them. Her Reductor curse could shatter not just objects but stone. Once, when they practiced on magically reinforced dummies, Hermione's spell sent one splintering against the far wall. It was a reminder, beneath her logic and books there burned a relentless will to protect what she loved. Then there was Luna Lovegood, an enigma among them all. She didn't duel like the others. Her movements were fluid, dreamlike, almost disconnected. But her spells found their mark. Her Stupefy came without warning, soft in its pronunciation, but powerful in its execution. She had the gift of unpredictability, making her a wild card in any skirmish. Her calm demeanor made her seem indifferent, but Luna had the heart of a warrior cloaked in whimsy. Her ability to believe in the impossible made her fearless, and fearlessness, in war, is a strength few can match. Terry Boot was another who brought a sharp edge to the group. Analytical and competitive, he turned each practice session into a tactical challenge. He memorized his opponent's patterns, adjusted his approach, and prided himself on precision. In one instance, when they held a 3-against-3 duel, Terry led his team with such coordination that even Harry raised his eyebrows. Boot wasn't just casting spells, he was orchestrating them. He viewed battle as a game of logic, a series of probabilities and reactions, and more often than not he was right. Number 15. Umbridge and the Truth Serum. Of all the moments in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, there is one that continues to send a chill down the spine of every attentive reader, despite being largely overlooked in the film adaptation. It's a scene set not in the Forbidden Forest or a shadowy corner of the Ministry, but in the clinical, oppressive office of Professor Dolores Jane Umbridge. Here, cloaked in doilies and sickening sweetness, unfolds one of the most sinister episodes of Hogwarts' recent history. A moment that reveals the full extent of Umbridge's thirst for control and the terrifying power of Veritaserum, the infamous truth serum of the wizarding world. When Harry is caught using the Flu network in Umbridge's office to contact Sirius Black, the tension skyrockets. He is seized, interrogated, and restrained. Umbridge believes she finally has the chance to uncover the secrets he is hiding. The secrets of Dumbledore's army, of Sirius's whereabouts, and of Dumbledore's supposed conspiracy. The Ministry has long painted Harry as a delusional troublemaker, and Umbridge is desperate to prove them right. Her weapon of choice? Serum. Though barely acknowledged in the film, this moment in the book is a crescendo of fear and strategy. Umbridge, who until then had relied on decrees and detentions, escalates her tyranny into something far more dangerous. She does not merely wish to punish Harry, she wants to extract the truth from his lips by any means necessary. She brandishes the Veritaserum vial like a dagger hidden in lace, a sweet voice unable to hide the menace that pulses beneath her words. The danger of Veritaserum is legendary. Professor Snape once warned Harry, Veritaserum, 3 drops of this, and you will spill your innermost secrets for this entire class to hear. The implications were terrifying. It is a potion that strips away the mind's defenses, silences the will, and reduces its victim to nothing more than a mouthpiece for raw, unfiltered truth. And in the hands of someone like Umbridge, who acts not out of justice, but obsession, it becomes a form of psychological torture. But fate smiled on Harry in a peculiar way. Umbridge, in her paranoia and arrogance, had demanded the potion from Snape. However, Snape, ever the slippery player of loyalties, provided her with a substance that was either diluted, expired, or entirely false. When she attempts to use it on Harry, she discovers that the bottle is empty. Furious, she calls Snape to her office, demanding more. Snape, true to form, reminds her with cold detachment that she had already used up her entire supply on previous interrogations. This single moment is pivotal. It highlights not only Umbridge's willingness to use illicit methods to extract information, but also Snape's subtle acts of resistance. While his true motives remain cloaked in ambiguity until the very end of the series, here he acts, perhaps intentionally, to sabotage Umbridge's scheme. By withholding the real Veritaserum, he buys Harry precious time. This quiet rebellion allows the scene to evolve from one of despair to one of cunning escape. With Umbridge momentarily stalled, Hermione Granger makes a split-second decision that changes the course of events. Knowing that the truth serum could resurface at any moment, and that Harry might not be able to resist it again, she performs one of her most brilliant acts of improvisation. She gasps, clutches Harry's arm, and insists that she knows where the weapon Dumbledore was hiding is located. The genius of Hermione's plan is in its plausibility. She does not deny the existence of the weapon, she fabricates its location, appealing to Umbridge's ego and paranoia. This is where the artistry of J.K. Rowling's storytelling truly shines. Hermione's fake confession is laced with just enough truth to be convincing, and just enough vagueness to keep it flexible. She tells Umbridge the weapon is hidden in the Forbidden Forest, the very place Umbridge despises. Driven by ambition and delusion, Umbridge takes the bait. She drags Hermione and Harry into the woods, leaving behind the safety of Hogwarts walls and inadvertently leading herself into the clutches of the centaurs. The Forbidden Forest episode is often remembered for Umbridge's ultimate comeuppance, but it is rooted in this earlier scene, the failed use of Veritaserum and Hermione's improvisation. Had the potion worked, Harry might have given up the entire Dumbledore's army, endangered Sirius, and exposed Dumbledore's plans. But thanks to Snape's subtle sabotage and Hermione's brilliance under pressure, the truth was kept hidden. Harry later reflects on this narrow escape, realizing just how close he came to betraying everyone he cared about. It's easy to underestimate the psychological weight of that moment. Harry is just 15, cornered, and facing the possibility of involuntary truth-telling. He knows that just one wrong word could destroy everything. Yet even under such pressure, he does not break. His internal strength, sharpened by trauma and grief, allows him to keep his silence long enough for Hermione to act. This reveals an often overlooked dimension of Harry's character, his ability to resist not just external threats but magical coercion. Moreover, the entire sequence underscores the failures of the Ministry. In its blind desire to control Hogwarts, it empowered Umbridge with near unlimited authority. The use of Veritaserum on students was never sanctioned by Dumbledore, but with him gone and the High Inquisitor in charge, The rules were rewritten to suit tyranny. Umbridge operated with no moral compass, only bureaucratic justification. Her willingness to use a truth serum on a minor is a clear violation of ethical boundaries and a reminder of how systems can be weaponized when power is left unchecked. Number 16. Help from Peeves. Of all the chapters in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, few are as delightfully subversive and deeply symbolic as Chapter 30, Grawp. Yet hidden within its pages lies a moment from Section 16 that resonates far beyond its brevity, a fleeting, almost mischievous alliance between the marauders of the present and the chaos of Hogwarts' past. Peeves, the poltergeist, known more for nuisance than nobility, unexpectedly becomes an emblem of resistance against Dolores Umbridge. His actions, subtle in the grand scheme of the plot, speak louder than many spells ever could. He, the eternal prankster, becomes a symbol of something much more serious: rebellion. When Fred and George Weasley make their grand escape, it is more than fireworks and swampy corridors. It is the spark that ignites a kind of revolution inside the castle walls. As they vanish into the night sky on their enchanted brooms, leaving behind the cries of laughter and disbelief, Hogwarts itself seems to wake up. And among those who stir with new purpose is none other than Peeves. He who had long tormented students and staff with unrepentant mischief suddenly chooses a side. What follows is not just comic relief, it is theatrical rebellion. Peeves, upon the departure of the Weasley twins, becomes an instrument of poetic justice. In a book where students are stripped of rights, where a boy's word is considered madness, and where authority suffocates the very soul of education, this spectral prankster becomes a hero in his own chaotic way. When Rowling writes, Peeves, who had never taken orders from anyone in living memory, saluted Fred and George with a solemnity that would not have been out of place at a military funeral, it is not just clever writing, it is a call to arms. Peeves's salute is more than a gesture, it is allegiance. Fred and George had orchestrated chaos as an art form, but Peeves was its godfather. In saluting them, he was acknowledging their mastery and accepting the torch they passed. It was the first time readers saw Peeves act not out of his own amusement, but out of solidarity. For a character whose only consistent motivation had been anarchy for its own sake, this moment signified a choice. He chose to defy Umbridge, and in doing so he found purpose. From that point on, Peeves becomes a thorn in Umbridge's side, acting with more precision than ever before. Rowling makes a point to describe his antics with affection and strategic timing. He doesn't simply toss water balloons or sing rude songs. He interferes, he disrupts. He wages a ghostly war of attrition, and it's all done without formal invitation, without Dumbledore's instruction, and certainly without any benefit to himself. Peeves, untouchable and unpredictable, becomes a rogue agent of the rebellion. What makes his contribution remarkable is the contrast. Peeves had always been a source of chaos, yet never political. His jokes never chose sides. His mischief knew no ideology. Yet when the very spirit of Hogwarts was under siege, even he could no longer remain neutral. In this way, his actions reflect a broader truth about oppression. Even the indifferent can be moved to resistance when tyranny becomes unbearable. The fact that it is Peeves, of all beings, who chooses to stand against Umbridge adds a layer of moral clarity to the narrative. Throughout the book, Rowling shows how Hogwarts changes under Umbridge's regime. Rules multiply, students are silenced, professors are intimidated, and even the walls seem to groan under the weight of ministry control. The castle itself, ancient and sentient in its own way, begins to react. The room of requirement appears more often, the staircases become more unreliable, paintings whisper warnings, and Peeves, he weaponizes his own nature. There's a particular moment when Peeves, in full swing of his rebellion, unscrews a chandelier to drop it in the hallway, not out of cruelty, but to obstruct the inquisitorial squad. It's slapstick and sabotage rolled into one. And though it's never fully explained how he manages such feats, the implication is clear. Peeves is not merely annoying, he's dangerous when properly motivated, and Umbridge, in her ignorance, has provoked him. Interestingly, the one person who could control Peeves, at least to some extent, was Albus Dumbledore. Earlier in the series, we see Dumbledore use a firm, quiet authority to dismiss him with a whisper of his name. Peeves respects power that is rooted in understanding. He loathes hypocrisy. So when Umbridge, representing a kind of blind, bureaucratic tyranny, rises to power, Peeves answers not with fear, but with gleeful defiance. It is as though the very soul of Hogwarts, chaotic and clever, found its voice in him. The importance of this cannot be overstated. Peeves, by nature, is a force of disorder. But in the world Rowling builds, even disorder can have moral dimensions. Peeves' disruption becomes resistance. His laughter becomes protest. His pranks become symbols. Every tripwire, every dung bomb, every flying object is a reminder that even in silence, rebellion can take root. There is a line in the book that best captures this transformation. When students talk of Fred and George's legacy, they don't just mention fireworks, they speak of courage. They mention how the swamp they left behind could not be removed, except by Flitwick, who preserved part of it as a tribute. That swamp is more than a mess, it is a monument, and Peeves is its eternal curator. He maintains the spirit of rebellion with the gleam of a child who knows he's gotten away with something brilliant. And herein lies the tragedy of the films. Peeves never appears. Not once. Entire generations of viewers are denied this spectral trickster. Denied his arc, denied his moment of choice. The films, for all their grandeur, miss the nuance that the books carefully build. Without Peeves, the resistance lacks its comic echo. The twins' rebellion feels smaller. Hogwarts feels a little less alive. Number 17, Symbols and Secrets of the Dumbledore's Army. When Hermione Granger first proposed the idea of a secret group to study defensive spells, it wasn't just a reaction to Professor Umbridge's suffocating curriculum, it was a rebellion. It was a spark lit in the heart of a dying fire, a whisper of truth in a castle drowning in lies. Dumbledore's army, or the DA, was born not out of mischief, but out of necessity. It became something far greater than its founders could ever have imagined, a symbol of defiance, of courage, and of unity in a world that was beginning to crumble around them. And while the films depicted the DA as a montage of wand-waving students in the Room of Requirement, the book wove a richer, more intimate portrait. It was never just about magic. It was about belief. From the very start, the DA was shaped by secrecy, not because its members wanted to be clandestine, but because the truth had been outlawed. Dolores Umbridge, the embodiment of oppressive control, had made it her mission to silence any voice that dared challenge the Ministry's narrative. In that suffocating atmosphere, gathering to practice defensive spells was more than disobedience. It was an act of spiritual resistance. "You're forming some sort of wizard army," she accused Harry, and in a way she was right. But what she failed to understand was that this army did not seek violence. It sought knowledge, power, yes, but the kind of power rooted in integrity, not domination. Each member of Dumbledore's army carried their own reasons for joining. For Neville Longbottom, it was about overcoming fear. For Luna Lovegood, it was about belonging. For Ginny Weasley, it was about stepping out of the shadow of her brothers. And for Harry, it was about finding meaning in pain. The DA was not just a club, it was a mirror held up to each of its members, reflecting who they were and who they might become. The Room of Requirement gave them space, but it was belief that gave them strength. One of the most touching symbols of the DA's spirit came from Hermione's enchanted coins. Modelled after a galleon, the coins were more than clever magic. They were a lifeline. "You'll be carrying proof that you're in the DA," she explained, "and the coin will tell you when the next meeting is." The spell used, Protean Charm, was NWT level, an impressive feat for a fifth-year student. But it wasn't just the charm's complexity that mattered. It was the care behind it. Hermione understood the importance of connection, of knowing that even when the world outside felt hostile, someone was reaching out to you. Then there were the badges, another small but powerful detail often missed. Hermione made a few of them for the coordinators, assigning roles and responsibility. It was subtle but revolutionary. In a world where adults refused to act, where authority had turned corrupt, young students took charge. Leadership was not appointed, it was earned through trust. There was power in that, and the DA felt it. A hierarchy born not of ego, but of mutual respect and shared purpose. The room of requirement itself stood as a metaphor, a hidden place that only revealed itself when truly needed. It was more than just a convenient hideout. It was a sacred space. The room changed its shape to suit their needs, providing cushions for falls, books for research, and even a practice dummy. It became a sanctuary untouched by the cold eyes of the ministry, a womb where the future could be quietly nurtured, while the world outside convulsed in fear and denial. In many ways, the DA became the very soul of Hogwarts during one of its darkest periods. The castle, once a place of learning and discovery, had become a prison under Umbridge's rule. The portraits spied, the inquisitorial squad bullied, and the walls themselves seemed to lean in to listen. But inside the room of requirement, hope survived. It pulsed in every lesson Harry gave, in every spell practiced, in every whispered name on Hermione's coin. What the book captured so poignantly, and what the film largely ignored, was the emotional alchemy that took place within the DA. Take Neville, for instance. He began as a boy who could barely cast a shield charm, but as the DA grew, so did he. In Chapter 21 of Order of the Phoenix, Harry notes with quiet astonishment, Neville had improved beyond all recognition. That growth wasn't just technical, it was spiritual. The DA gave him confidence, a sense of worth, a glimpse of the warrior he would one day become in the Battle of Hogwarts. And then there's Luna, so often seen as the quirky outsider. She was embraced fully by the DA. Within those walls, her eccentricities were not mocked but honored. She belonged. That inclusion was itself a revolutionary act in a school that often favored conformity. The DA taught magic, yes, but it also taught acceptance. It was a place where labels dissolved and hearts spoke freely. The spirit of resistance ran deep, even in the way the group operated. Decisions were made together. Every member had a voice. Even when fear crept in, when Marietta Edgecombe betrayed them and the DA nearly dissolved, it was not Harry alone who decided the fate of the group. They all felt the consequences. "She's a sneak!" Hermione had hexed the parchment with that very word, a silent curse that exposed betrayal. That moment served as both a protection and a warning. Loyalty mattered, and secrets were sacred. The DA meetings were not always smooth. Sometimes wands malfunctioned. Sometimes spells went wrong. But that imperfection was beautiful. It reflected life. And unlike Umbridge's cold, textbook-based approach, Harry's lessons were filled with experience. He didn't teach from theory. He taught from the battlefield. "Expelliarmus saved my life," he reminded them, referring to his duel with Voldemort. That truth, a simple spell as a shield against darkness, became a mantra for them all. Every chapter involving the DA carried an undercurrent of something ancient, as if the group was more than a collection of students, as if they were reenacting something timeless, the struggle of light against shadow. Their youth didn't diminish their power. On the contrary, it magnified it, because their courage was untrained, their defiance unfiltered. They weren't fighting because they were ordered to. They were fighting because their hearts demanded it. When Dobby warned them that Umbridge had found out and the group disbanded temporarily, the silence that followed felt like a funeral. The room of requirement disappeared. The coins went cold. But the spirit did not die. Even months later, students spoke of the DA in hushed tones like it was a legend, a symbol, something they could believe in when everything else was falling apart. The DA also carried a deeper, more mystical mystery, one rooted in its connection to Dumbledore himself. Though he claimed not to know about the group, it was telling that he took the blame without hesitation when they were discovered. "It is I who instructed Harry to form this organization," he declared, shielding the students from punishment. That moment wasn't just a plot device. It was a profound statement. Dumbledore knew that truth often required sacrifice. His willingness to become a fugitive for the sake of student rebellion elevated the DA from secret club to symbol of legacy. And then there was the emotional heartbeat, friendship. What united the members was not shared skill but shared trust. Watching each other fail, watching each other rise, created bonds deeper than any house loyalty. DA members risked everything to stand beside one another. That was no small thing. In a school under siege by fear, they chose hope. In a society drowning in lies, they spoke truth, even if it was only among themselves. The greatest tragedy of the film adaptation was not that it shortened the training scenes, but that it overlooked this intangible essence. The soul of the DA was never in the spells. It was in the silence before casting, in the way hands trembled before wands were raised, in the stolen glances that said, "We are afraid, but we will not bow." That atmosphere, dense with meaning, is what made the DA more than a subplot. It made it a prophecy in action. Even their name, Dumbledore's Army, was a provocation. It dared to associate students with rebellion. It dared to invoke the name of a man the Ministry feared. It was in itself an act of magic. Words, after all, are the oldest spells. By naming themselves so, they declared allegiance not just to a man, but to an idea, to a future worth fighting for. And in that name echoed something Umbridge could never understand: faith. When the battle finally came, in Deathly Hallows, it was the DA that held the line. Under Neville's leadership, they had continued the meetings, protected younger students, and kept the light burning in Hogwarts. That legacy, the spark lit in the Room of Requirement, became a wildfire. The DA had grown into what it was always meant to be, not just a group, but a movement, proof that age means nothing in the face of truth. Their story reminds us that resistance doesn't always begin with grand gestures. Sometimes it begins in whispers, in coins passed from hand to hand, in parchment with names, in the quiet of a hidden room where young hearts choose to believe in something greater than fear. Dumbledore's Army was not a rebellion of spells, it was a rebellion of spirit, and no film can capture that if it forgets to show the soul behind the wand. Number 18, more than just training. Of all the hidden corners in Hogwarts, none burned with such quiet resistance and fierce loyalty as the Room of Requirement when it transformed into the training ground for Dumbledore's Army. While the films reduced the group to a series of spell practice sessions, the book revealed something deeper, richer, and far more human. A fellowship born not just of necessity, but of faith, purpose, and the aching need for connection in a time of darkness. Dumbledore's Army, or the DA as they called themselves, was more than a student-led rebellion. It was a family. For Harry Potter, who had grown up starved for affection and isolated even within the wizarding world, the formation of the DA was a profound turning point. It wasn't merely that he was teaching others, but that others trusted him enough to be taught. In Order of the Phoenix, we see Harry hesitantly step into the role of a leader, not because he craved it, but because it was needed. The Ministry of Magic had silenced the truth. Dolores Umbridge had silenced the school, and in that suffocating silence, the DA became a breath of oxygen. When Hermione suggested the group, she said, "It's about having a voice when we're not supposed to." And that voice echoed far beyond the castle walls. The first meeting in the Hog's Head was chaotic, almost laughable, but those who showed up did so because they believed, not just in Harry, but in the idea that they could learn to fight back. Luna Lovegood, so often dismissed for her eccentricities, joined because she knew deep down that the world was turning dangerous, and no one, least of all the Ministry, was going to protect them. Neville Longbottom, awkward and overlooked, saw in the DA a place where he could become more than the boy who forgot things. And Ginny Weasley, often relegated to the shadows of her older brothers, found a space to shine as herself. The Room of Requirement responded to their need not just with cushions and books, but with warmth, safety, and silence from the outside world. Every time they entered, it shifted to meet them, providing exactly what they needed in that moment. It was not just a training room, it was a sanctuary. This mattered more than the spells they learned. They weren't just learning Expelliarmus or Stupefy, they were learning to hope, to believe in each other, and most importantly, to trust. Harry's teaching style was unpolished, but it carried a raw honesty that none of them had felt in a classroom before. He didn't speak from theory, he spoke from experience. He talked about dodging Death Eaters, surviving the Triwizard Tournament, and holding his ground when others would run. As the lessons went on, he became something more than a classmate. He became a symbol of resistance, of proof that one person could make a difference, even when everything seemed lost. Neville's transformation was one of the most stirring outcomes of the DA. Once mocked and marginalized, he flourished under Harry's guidance. His confidence grew, not because he suddenly gained magical prowess, but because he was finally in a place where he was believed in. By the end of the year, Neville could cast a flawless Impedimenta and Protego. In one particularly poignant moment, Rowling writes, Neville's face was alight with the kind of determination Harry had never seen there before. That light had always been there, it just needed space to burn. Ginny, too, found her power in the DA. She wasn't just Ron's little sister or Harry's admirer, she was fierce, fast, and unshakably loyal. Her talent with the Bat-Bogey Hex became legendary within the group. When Umbridge's regime closed in, Ginny didn't hesitate. She fought, she protected others, and she refused to back down. In the DA, she wasn't background, she was leadership in action. Luna Lovegood added a quiet strength to the group. Often underestimated, she had a kind of unshakable calm that helped others believe even when fear was thick in the air. When others faltered, Luna simply tilted her head and said something unexpected, yet oddly reassuring. She wasn't trying to be brave, she just was. The DA was perhaps the first place where Luna was seen for who she truly was, a gifted witch with wisdom beyond her years. For many, the DA was the first experience of genuine friendship untainted by hierarchy or competition. Cho Chang, grieving Cedric, found temporary solace in the DA's solidarity. Even Zacharias Smith, who often questioned Harry's authority, continued to show up, proving that deep down, he too recognized the value of unity. The DA was not perfect, but it was honest. They laughed during practice, they struggled with spells, they helped each other without hesitation. Seamus Finnegan, once skeptical of Harry's story about Voldemort's return, slowly came to see the truth, not through argument, but through watching Harry lead with compassion and strength. The DA changed minds, not with propaganda, but with presence. When Umbridge discovered the DA and tried to destroy it, the group's bond didn't break. In fact, it grew stronger. The risk of punishment made the meetings more urgent, more sacred. They were no longer just training to pass the time, they were preparing for war. And when the Inquisitorial Squad cracked down, members of the DA protected each other, lied for each other, and stood together even when it cost them. In the end, it wasn't the spells that saved Hogwarts during the battle. It was the spirit born in those secret meetings. The same students who had trained in secret stood up against Death Eaters and fought like seasoned warriors. Dean Thomas, who once played a supporting role, hurled curses with unflinching precision. Lavender Brown, Parvati Patil, Ernie Macmillan, they all answered the call. Harry, for his part, carried the DA in his heart long after the group was disbanded. It had been his first real proof that leadership didn't come from titles or bloodlines. It came from the willingness to act when others were silent. As he stood at Dobby's grave in Deathly Hallows, remembering all those he had lost, it was the DA that reminded him of why he fought. They were his family, a family born not of blood but of battle and belief. Rowling didn't give us a perfect utopia in the DA. There were disagreements, crushes, awkward moments. But she gave us something more real, a place where young people reclaimed their agency. In a world where adults failed them, Fudge with his lies, Umbridge with her cruelty, even Dumbledore with his silence, they found power in each other. The DA taught them how to duel, yes, but more importantly, it taught them how to resist, how to protect, how to build. In a time when Hogwarts was no longer safe, they made it safe for each other. As Hermione once said, we're not just doing this for fun, we're doing it because it's necessary. In those dimly lit sessions with spells flying and parchment scattered, something sacred took root. It was the belief that even in the darkest times, unity could kindle hope. The DA wasn't a rebellion, it was a declaration of identity, a refusal to be silent, a vow to stand tall even when the law bent crooked. And when Voldemort fell and the ashes of the battle settled, it was the DA's spirit that endured. It had never really ended, because in truth the DA was never about fighting. It was about remembering who they were and what they stood for. In that sense, it was the most powerful magic they ever practiced. Even years later, when members of the DA gathered again, at reunions, in memory, in silent understanding, they carried the room of requirement in their hearts. It wasn't a place, it was a promise, and it lived on in every act of courage, every whisper of truth, and every hand extended in friendship when the world demanded obedience. That's what the movies missed. Not the dueling, not the secret meetings, but the heartbeat beneath it all. Dumbledore's army wasn't just a training group, it was a sanctuary, a resistance, a family, and perhaps in the truest sense of magic, a miracle. Number 19, Luna Lovegood, as a quiet leader. Of all the students who passed through the grand halls of Hogwarts during the Second Wizarding War, few left as indelible a mark as Luna Lovegood. Her name rarely tops the lists of heroes or battle leaders, and yet her quiet strength and unwavering individuality turned her into a beacon of hope for those who struggled to fit into the rigid definitions of bravery and power. In the films, she drifts through scenes with a dreamy stare and soft voice, her oddities often played for comic relief. But the books, with their deeper, more textured world, reveal a different truth. Luna Lovegood was never just a quirky bystander. She was, in her own peculiar way, a leader. When she first appeared in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, readers were introduced to a girl with radish earrings, a necklace of butterbeer corks, and an unabashed belief in creatures that even the magical world doubted. But Luna didn't just believe in the extraordinary, she embodied it. Where others hesitated, she moved forward. Where others sought the comfort of conformity, she embraced the power of difference. Despite being laughed at, mocked, and dismissed as Loony Lovegood by her peers, Luna never once tried to be anyone but herself. That in itself is the mark of someone unshakably strong. During the formation of Dumbledore's army in the Room of Requirement, Luna stood out, not by trying to, but by simply being present in a way that demanded attention. She didn't raise her voice above others. She didn't command through force or charisma. Instead, her leadership was demonstrated in how she listened, how she observed, and how she contributed without ego. She took in Harry's lessons with quiet intensity and practiced diligently, never mocking, never questioning his authority. In that group of misfits and rebels, she found something deeper than just spell work. She found a purpose. It was in the DA that Luna's resilience became impossible to ignore. When Harry was plagued by the burden of being the chosen one, exhausted by the constant attention, and reeling from Cho Chang's unpredictable emotions, it was Luna who offered a grounding presence. In one of the most understated but powerful scenes, Harry finds himself isolated at the end of a difficult day, only to stumble upon Luna pinning up flyers for her missing belongings, which had once again been stolen by students. Rather than displaying any bitterness or anger, she shrugged it off with serene acceptance, saying, "People expect you to have cooler friends than Luna Lovegood." In that simple, poignant moment, her self-awareness and emotional intelligence cut through the fog of teenage cruelty. Unlike others who craved validation, Luna had an internal compass that pointed unwaveringly toward truth. When others dismissed the idea of the Thestrals, she calmly corrected them, gently educating without ever condescending. She was among the few who could see these creatures because she had seen death, specifically the death of her mother. Yet she carried that tragedy not as a wound, but as part of her armor. Her acceptance of grief and the mysteries beyond death gave her a rare depth of understanding that even the most intelligent students lacked. In the Department of Mysteries, when the DA was thrust into a real-life battle far beyond anything they had practiced for, Luna did not falter. She fought with the same determination as Hermione or Ginny, her spells sharp and precise. Her courage wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. Unlike those who boasted about dueling or lineage, Luna fought because it was the right thing to do, not for glory, not for revenge. When Harry needed warriors, she became one. Not through transformation, but by revealing a facet of herself that had always been there, waiting to be seen. The true test of Luna's inner strength came during the war, when Hogwarts fell under the control of Death Eaters. Most students either kept their heads down or were forced into submission. Luna, however, continued to resist. She attended secret meetings, stood by Neville and Ginny, and refused to be silenced. Eventually, her courage led to her capture and imprisonment in the Malfoy Manor. Even in captivity, Luna remained remarkably composed. Mr. Ollivander, who was imprisoned alongside her, later described her as a source of light in the darkness. Her empathy and calm demeanor provided others with the strength to survive. In a place meant to break minds and spirits, Luna Lovegood became a symbol of endurance. When she finally returned to Hogwarts, it wasn't as a passive observer. She stood beside her friends during the Battle of Hogwarts, casting spells and fighting Death Eaters without hesitation. She was the one who reminded Harry about the diadem, a crucial clue that led to the destruction of one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. In the chaos of battle, while others panicked, Luna's mind remained clear. Her knowledge of Ravenclaw's relics, paired with her unwavering belief in Harry, proved to be a turning point in their mission. Her input was not decorative, it was critical. Even in quieter moments, Luna led with an intuition that seemed almost supernatural. After the battle, when Harry found himself overwhelmed by the press and the mourning of so many, it was Luna who gently guided him away from the crowd, understanding that what he needed was peace. She didn't demand thanks or praise. She simply saw what others couldn't and acted. This capacity for emotional insight, an ability to connect with what people truly needed, not just what they said, set Luna apart from nearly everyone. J.K. Rowling's writing reveals that Luna's mind worked on a frequency few could understand, but those who did came to rely on her. When Xenophilius Lovegood betrayed the trio out of desperation to save his daughter, Luna never condemned him. She understood fear and love, and she forgave. Her maturity, especially regarding human emotions, was years ahead of many adults in the series. Her beliefs, while often ridiculed, were rooted in open-mindedness. She taught others to consider possibilities instead of dismissing them, and that kind of thinking was essential in a world at war. In the Deathly Hallows, when the trio visited her home, it became clear just how important Luna had become to them. Her room, decorated with portraits of her friends connected by a golden thread, served as proof of her loyalty. It was a visual manifestation of how she saw the world, not as a place of divisions and hierarchy, but as a tapestry of relationships held together by compassion. That image alone tells readers more about Luna's heart than pages of dialogue ever could. Leadership often wears armor. It shouts commands, stands on podiums, and carries a wand with authority. Luna Lovegood's leadership was quieter but no less powerful. She didn't need a title. She led by example, by believing in others when they stopped believing in themselves, by offering peace in the middle of chaos, and by showing that strength comes in many forms. When others chased power, she chose truth. Her impact didn't end with the fall of Voldemort. In the years that followed, she became a renowned magizoologist, dedicating her life to discovering magical creatures and advocating for the misunderstood, but she never lost her wonder, her kindness, or her strange beauty. She married Rolf Scamander, grandson of Newt Scamander, further linking her to the tradition of magical exploration and compassion for all beings. She remained true to her path, untouched by fame or expectation. There is a certain magic in being unapologetically yourself, especially in a world that constantly tries to mold you. Luna taught her friends and readers that you don't have to change to be worthy. You don't have to speak loudly to be heard, and you don't have to lead from the front to lead at all. In a war that forced many to compromise their values, Luna held on to hers. That may be the rarest courage of all. Harry himself, in one of the most telling moments of the series, once remarked that Luna saw the truth. "You're just as sane as I am," he said to her, a line that on the surface seems light, but carries the weight of recognition. He saw her not as an oddity, but as someone who had endured, believed, and acted with clarity. She had earned his trust and, more importantly, his respect. Not everyone in the series can claim that honor. Neville Longbottom, too, became one of her closest allies. During the final year at Hogwarts, their bond strengthened as they led the resistance. Where Neville brought bravery, Luna brought wisdom. Where he rallied fighters, she kept their spirits from breaking. Together, they formed a perfect balance, and while Neville's arc is often highlighted, Luna's role in sustaining the resistance is equally deserving of praise. Perhaps the greatest testament to Luna's leadership lies in how others changed because of her. Ginny, who had always been fiercely independent, found in Luna a kindred spirit. Hermione, though initially skeptical of Luna's beliefs, came to respect her deeply. Even Ron, who once laughed at her eccentricities, stood with her in the end. Luna didn't ask for followers, but she inspired them nonetheless. In every battle, there are those who draw swords and those who offer their hands. Luna Lovegood did both. She was a warrior in her own right, but her true weapon was her unwavering soul. In the darkest times, she remained a light, not because she pretended everything was fine, but because she believed it could be again. That hope, that resilience, and that quiet wisdom made her more than just a supporting character. She was a guide, a leader, a hero in a butterbeer cork necklace. Luna Lovegood reminds us that leadership isn't about being the loudest or the strongest. Sometimes it's about being the most faithful, about seeing beauty where others see madness, about standing firm in your truth when the world calls you strange. Her legacy is not etched in statues or songs, but in the hearts of those who learned from her that being different is not a weakness. It is, in fact, the greatest strength of all. Number 20, Umbridge's hunt for the room. Of all the tensions brewing at Hogwarts during the tumultuous 5th year of Harry Potter's education, few were as quietly intense and psychologically charged as the silent battle between Dolores Umbridge and the secret organization she sought to dismantle, Dumbledore's army. Hidden away in the enchanted walls of the Room of Requirement, Harry and his closest allies trained in defense against the dark arts, while Umbridge, drunk on power and armed with ministry authority, launched a relentless campaign to uncover them. This was not merely a conflict of students against a teacher, it was a war of wits, patience, and magical cunning, waged in the shadows of a castle steeped in secrets. The Room of Requirement, a sentient chamber, located on the 7th floor, had always been a mystery to most Hogwarts students. It could not be seen or found unless one knew exactly what they needed and passed before it with a focused mind. For centuries, it had offered everything from hidden lavatories to storage chambers, but now it served a nobler purpose, the heartbeat of resistance. To Harry, Hermione, Ron, and the rest of the Dumbledore's army, it became a sanctuary where they could sharpen their magical skills in defiance of the repressive regime imposed by the ministry-appointed High Inquisitor. Dolores Umbridge, however, was no fool. She might have been blind to love and friendship, but she could sense insubordination in the air like the foul scent of smoke before a fire. Her instincts, sharpened by paranoia and her obsession with control, told her that something was happening within the castle that she could not see, and that, to her, was the ultimate insult. She responded not with direct attacks, but with measures of surveillance, manipulation, and fear, tools she wielded with the cold precision of a bureaucratic tyrant. Her first move was to fracture the student body itself. She began encouraging students to inform on one another, rewarding betrayal with privileges and a false sense of superiority. The inquisitorial squad, made up of Slytherins like Draco Malfoy, Pansy Parkinson, and Millicent Bulstrode, were granted sweeping powers to search bags, question students, and even dock points. These measures did little to uncover the room of requirement, but they sowed an atmosphere of fear, forcing the members of the Dumbledore's army to be constantly vigilant. The room, however, adapted. Whenever someone from the Dumbledore's army approached it with the desire to train in secret and not be seen, it transformed itself into a hidden sanctuary. It would seal itself from all others, its entrance invisible to those who were not part of its purpose. "The room's got a mind of its own," said Dobby the house elf in Order of the Phoenix. "It'll only open for those who really need it." Umbridge, for all her authority, could not grasp the idea that a room could deny her. Undeterred, Umbridge escalated her efforts. She cast detection spells throughout the castle, tracing charms, revealing incantations, and alertness enchantments. None worked. She even went so far as to install magical pingers, small enchanted devices intended to light up in the presence of strong magic. The room of requirement, however, shielded itself so thoroughly that even these spells failed to detect it. The castle, ancient and wise in its own right, seemed to resist her, as though protecting its students. There is a curious moment in the book where Filch, the caretaker, nearly stumbles upon the room. He is seen sniffing around the 7th floor, following some instinct, or perhaps merely obeying Umbridge's vague instructions to inspect every crevice. Yet even he walks past the room 3 times, grumbling, never finding its entrance. His failure underscores the room's own power, one that operates on need, not authority. In one of the more telling scenes, Hermione speculates on why Umbridge can't find the room. "She doesn't know what she's looking for," she says. "You have to really need it, and she doesn't even believe such magic exists." It's a moment that encapsulates the broader philosophical war between the ministry and the students. One side believes in control and the written law, the other in trust, magic, and faith in one another. The room of requirement only responds to those with a true need, and in that need is honesty, something Umbridge lacked entirely. The Dumbledore's army operated under this cover for months. Meetings were scheduled with care, messages passed through enchanted coins. Hermione's brilliant idea that allowed each member to know the time of the next meeting by checking a serial number on the galleon that would change and grow warm when updated. This ensured that no paper trail existed, no notes that could be intercepted. The very structure of the rebellion was designed to be invisible, built upon lessons in resistance passed down from Dumbledore himself. Still, Umbridge did not relent. Her obsession deepened with each passing week. She stationed herself more and more frequently near the 7th floor corridor, prowling like a cat before a mouse hole. She interrogated students on their movements, demanded access to their schedules, and even began experimenting with truth serums. When she discovered that the standard verite serum was not working on certain students, either due to their resistance or the dilution of the potion, she lobbied the ministry for the use of more dangerous means. Fortunately, Professor Snape refused to supply her with more of the potion, citing that she had used up his entire stock on useless interrogations. It wasn't until the betrayal by Marietta Edgecombe that Umbridge finally found her way inside the room of requirement. Marietta, under pressure and perhaps guilt from her mother, who worked at the ministry, confided in Umbridge about the secret meetings, but even then the room did not simply reveal itself. When Umbridge and the inquisitorial squad finally burst in on a Dumbledore's army meeting, it was because the room allowed them in. Harry had failed to ensure that the door remained sealed to intruders during that particular session. The betrayal itself was dramatic. In Order of the Phoenix, the passage reads, "The door opened with a bang, and she came in with the squad at her heels." It was the culmination of months of quiet war. The room had held strong for so long, resisting charms, enchantments, and pure malice, but in the end, it was not magic that undid them, but human weakness. The lesson was bitter and painful, but real. Even the best plans can falter if trust is misplaced. It is telling that even after Umbridge had found the room, she could not control it. When she tried to use it herself, the room did not cooperate. It would not yield its secrets. It would not open when she demanded entry for surveillance or storage. Its loyalty remained tied to the intent behind the seeker's heart. Her desire was rooted in punishment and control, not need, and so it defied her still. This entire subplot is reduced in the film to a single betrayal and an abrupt capture. The psychological tension, the near misses, the magical strategies, none of it is explored on screen, but in the novel it becomes a game of cat and mouse, a magical Cold War played in corridors full of faint clues and false leads. Students faked injuries to avoid classes and sneak into the room, while Umbridge imposed new rules daily, some so absurd that even other teachers rebelled in subtle, pointed ways. Professor McGonagall, for instance, never directly interfered, but her disapproval was palpable. "I will not have this school turned into a prison," she once told Umbridge flatly. Even Professor Flitwick subtly protected the Dumbledore's army by allowing charms to go unchecked, choosing to ignore when a window or door was magically locked during classes. The teachers, like the room, seemed to understand that some battles had to be fought not with wands but with quiet defiance. For Harry, this era was defining. His leadership grew stronger in those weeks of secrecy. He taught others what he knew, not only spells but belief in themselves. Neville Longbottom, once fumbling and shy, began to show courage. Ginny Weasley emerged as a gifted duelist. Even Luna Lovegood's unconventional approaches gained respect. The room wasn't just a place to train, it became a crucible of change. Umbridge's failure to fully conquer the Room of Requirement mirrors her failure to understand the essence of Hogwarts itself. The castle is not merely stone and magic, it is alive with legacy, memory, and will. It guards its children when they are right. The more Umbridge tried to bend it to her rules, the more it resisted her presence. In the end, it wasn't brute force or policy that gave her access, but a chink in the human chain, something even the most powerful magic cannot always prevent. The story of Umbridge's search for the Room of Requirement is one of the most fascinating and underestimated plots in Order of the Phoenix. It reflects a deeper theme in the series, that belief, unity, and purpose are stronger than oppression. Though Umbridge had power, titles, and decrees, she could not break the will of students who believed in something greater than rules. The Room of Requirement, in its quiet wisdom, became the ultimate symbol of that resistance, a room that gave not what was wanted, but what was truly needed. Its loyalty, like magic itself, could not be bought or bullied, and in that it echoed the heart of Dumbledore's army, loyal, brave, and determined to learn not just how to defend, but why to stand up. Even when the odds were against them, and even when the door nearly gave way to tyranny, the room, like Hogwarts itself, stood with those who dared to hope. Number 21, Sirius Black's influence. Of all the secret chambers, hidden prophecies, and clandestine rebellions in the wizarding world, few are remembered with such warmth and fire as Dumbledore's army. Created in the shadowed halls of Hogwarts during the dark rise of Dolores Umbridge's regime, the DA, more than just a group of young students practicing defensive spells, became a symbol of youthful defiance, courage, and unity. And while the names most often linked to its origin are those of Harry Potter, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley, there lies a lesser-known truth quietly beating in the background like a second heart: the unspoken role of Sirius Black. Sirius Black, the godfather of Harry Potter, was never seen holding a wand in Room of Requirement or coaching spells beside Neville Longbottom, yet his influence bled into every whispered meeting and every secret dueling practice. From the confines of the grim and haunted Number 12, Grimmauld Place, Sirius played his part not with hexes or charms, but with words. His spirit, defiant, rebellious, and loyal to the bitter end, laid an invisible foundation for the army Harry would come to lead. And though the films muted this thread, the book Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix carved it in bold ink. It was during those long winter nights at Grimmauld Place, with snow falling outside and whispers of the Order's missions floating around the house, that Sirius began to sow the seeds of leadership in Harry. The 5th year at Hogwarts was already brewing into something darker. The Ministry refused to acknowledge Voldemort's return. Fudge's paranoia had grown into state-sponsored gaslighting. And Umbridge, rosy-cheeked and cruel, was tightening her grip on Hogwarts with a pink velvet fist. In such times, Sirius chose his words carefully, yet powerfully. He never told Harry what to do. Instead, he reminded him of who he was, or rather, whose son he was. "You're doing just as your father would have done," Sirius said one night after Harry had stood up to Umbridge in defense against the dark arts class. That line, simple as it was, rippled through Harry like a phoenix's cry. It wasn't just encouragement, it was validation from the one adult figure who didn't treat him like a boy in over his head. In the book, Harry is plagued by doubt. He's angry, often isolated, and unsure of his role in the growing battle. Hermione sees the need for resistance. Ron sees the injustice. But it is Sirius who fuels the emotional fire inside Harry to act. When Hermione first proposes the idea of forming a group to practice defensive magic, Harry hesitates. He questions if he's good enough to lead others. And it's Sirius's faith that tips the scale. In Chapter 24, Occlumency, Sirius tells Harry during a flu conversation, the world isn't split into good people and Death Eaters. But earlier, in Grimmauld Place, he says something that never leaves Harry. "You're a lot more like your father than I thought." Those moments weren't just casual remarks, they were catalysts. The DA didn't need a teacher, it needed a leader, and Sirius, perhaps unintentionally, trained Harry to become one. James Potter, as portrayed by Sirius, was brave, reckless, and fiercely loyal. To Sirius, Harry leading the DA wasn't just resistance, it was legacy. He saw James in every spell Harry cast, every rule he broke in the name of justice. When Harry started the DA, Sirius didn't warn him against it. He didn't chide him for rebelling against school authority. Instead, he supported it, he smiled at it, he encouraged it. This support wasn't without layers. Sirius, confined to Grimmauld Place by Dumbledore for his own safety, longed for the rebellion he once led in his youth. He couldn't fight beside the Order like he used to. But through Harry, he found a vessel for his fire. He often romanticized the days of the Marauders, reminding Harry that great movements often begin with small acts. Skipping class, sneaking out, dueling in secret, all things the Marauders had done, all things the DA would soon be doing. There's a bittersweetness in these parallels. Harry, while grateful for Sirius's faith, also sensed the underlying ache in him. Sirius wasn't just encouraging Harry, he was living vicariously through him. It was a complicated bond, forged in loyalty but tempered by loss. And yet, it was exactly what Harry needed in that moment. Someone who didn't see him as the chosen one, or as a child, but as a fighter. The story becomes more poignant when one remembers that Dumbledore himself had been distant with Harry during this time. The headmaster, for all his wisdom, had pushed Harry away in an effort to protect him. It was Sirius who filled that void, stepping in as mentor, confidant, and emotional anchor. Without this guidance, would Harry have found the confidence to lead a secret army against Umbridge's tyranny? In Chapter 27, The Centaur and the Sneak, when news reaches Sirius that the DA is actively practicing in secret, his reaction is one of proud amusement. He doesn't scold them, he doesn't warn them to stop. He says, "I'm glad you're keeping your nose to the grindstone." His words aren't cautious, they're celebratory. Because Sirius understood that rebellion is born in resistance, not in compliance. This is where the film adaptations failed to capture the depth of his role. In the movies, Sirius's connection to the DA is almost non-existent, but in the book, his presence is undeniable. It's in the tone of Harry's voice when he commands the group. It's in the way he chooses to teach, not from superiority, but from experience. It's in the way he begins to understand leadership, not as dominance, but as trust. There's an irony that Sirius, who never stepped foot into the room of requirement, was spiritually present in every lesson. When Harry taught the Patronus charm, a spell deeply connected to his own trauma and strength, he was embodying the belief Sirius had in him. "If only my father could see this," Harry thought during one of the meetings. And then came the silent answer. Sirius could, and he would have been proud. Even in death, Sirius's impact lingered. After the tragedy at the Department of Mysteries, Harry's grief was devastating. He blamed himself for leading the DA, for pushing his friends into danger. But with time, that pain transformed. It hardened into resolve. The DA continued to meet, to fight, to believe. And in every act of bravery, there was a flicker of Sirius, a shadow at Harry's shoulder, whispering courage into his ear. The role of Sirius in the DA's creation is a testament to the idea that influence isn't always visible. It doesn't always wear robes or cast spells. Sometimes it's a voice on the other side of a fireplace. Sometimes it's a memory of a smile after breaking a rule. Sometimes it's the belief in you when the rest of the world tells you to stand down. Hermione brought strategy. Ron brought loyalty. Luna brought open-mindedness. Neville brought resilience. But Harry brought heart, and that heart was fed by Sirius's flame. It was a dangerous flame, sometimes reckless, but always burning against injustice. That is the seldom-told truth, that Dumbledore's army was not just a student rebellion, it was a continuation of the spirit that once defined the First Order of the Phoenix. And Sirius Black, though never present in person, passed his torch to a new generation, not through orders, but through trust. The next time someone speaks of Harry as the leader of the DA, let them remember the man who called him by his father's name. The man who smiled at rule-breaking not for chaos but for justice. The man who believed that even in the darkest times, laughter, courage, and friendship were acts of rebellion. And let us remember that legacy is not always written in spells or history books. Sometimes it's found in the courage to stand up, to speak truth, to teach others what you know, even if all you have is belief. In that way, Sirius Black was in the room of requirement all along. Number 22, students from other houses. The dimly lit room of the room of requirement shimmered with energy. A blazing fire crackled in a conjured hearth, and the clatter of practicing students echoed against the ancient stone walls. At the heart of it stood not just Gryffindors, despite what the films may have us believe, but a diverse assembly of Hogwarts students from every house but Slytherin. Often misrepresented as a Gryffindor club led by Harry Potter, Dumbledore's army was far more inclusive in the books. It was, in truth, a student resistance group bound by courage, yes, but also by wisdom, loyalty, and tenacity, qualities belonging to Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs as much as to Gryffindors. One such student was Anthony Goldstein, a quiet yet resolute Ravenclaw in the same year as Harry. Mentioned sparingly in the series, Anthony's involvement in Dumbledore's army is more than a footnote. His analytical mind and calm demeanour brought balance to the more impulsive tendencies of the Gryffindors. It is no small thing that J.K. Rowling chose him later as one of the few to be invited back to fight in the Battle of Hogwarts. In Order of the Phoenix, Anthony is listed by Hermione as one of the students who joined the group, indicating his early and consistent support. He exemplified what the DA truly was, not a Gryffindor rebellion, but a school-wide cry for justice. Padma Patil, also from Ravenclaw, was another who stood shoulder to shoulder with Harry in the room of requirement. While many remember her as Ron's uncomfortable date at the Yule Ball, her character deepens in the context of Dumbledore's army. As the twin sister of Parvati Patil, she joined the DA not because of house loyalty, but because of belief in a cause greater than inter-house rivalry. Her spells were sharp, and her attendance consistent. Padma Patil was walking around with her wand raised, muttering incantations, the book tells us during one of the sessions. She was not background decoration, she was actively learning, adapting, and preparing. From Hufflepuff there was Ernie Macmillan, pompous in demeanour, but earnest in heart. Ernie was known for announcing things rather dramatically, yet his loyalty never wavered. "I'm with you, Harry," he declared after years of scepticism. His shift from doubter to defender is one of the quieter triumphs of Order of the Phoenix. He not only joined the DA, but helped normalise the idea of open rebellion against Umbridge among Hufflepuffs. Ernie's involvement gave the DA moral weight. It showed that even those who once mistrusted Harry could rise above old judgments. Another key Hufflepuff was Hannah Abbott, a kind-hearted and sometimes nervous girl. She too joined the DA early on and participated in the sessions, standing firm even as the threat of discovery loomed. While her magical skill was perhaps not the most remarkable, her consistency and courage mattered more. Hannah Abbott had to be taken to the hospital wing after a particularly nasty hex from Zachariah Smith misfired, the book recounts, subtly reinforcing the point that these sessions were not play acting. They were real, risky, and demanded everything of every student, regardless of their house. Zachariah Smith, also a Hufflepuff, remains one of the most complicated additions to the DA. His skepticism, snide remarks, and tendency to question Harry's authority were a thorn in the group's side, and yet his inclusion is perhaps the most revealing. It illustrates that the DA was not some ideological echo chamber. Smith did not believe in Harry blindly. He was cautious, often irritatingly so, but he stayed, he trained, he returned for the final battle. Zachariah Smith was hurrying past the line of fighters towards the entrance hall, Rowling writes, suggesting perhaps a moment of cowardice or realism. Yet earlier, his presence proves that dissenters were not only tolerated, but welcomed. Even Terry Boot, another Ravenclaw and a minor character to many, played a significant role in reinforcing the DA's inter-house nature. Clever and inquisitive, Terry's questions often reflected the analytical nature of his house. When Harry explained the basics of casting a Patronus, Terry asked about its origin and nature, not to undermine Harry, but to understand the magic more deeply. This was the Ravenclaw spirit at work within the DA, a thirst for knowledge fused with action. The text notes Terry attending several sessions, participating eagerly, and working collaboratively with other students. The Room of Requirement itself, the DA's sacred ground, responded to the needs of every student, not just Gryffindors. The cushions, the shelves of books, the dummies for spell practice. It was a haven for shared growth, not tribal pride. Ravenclaws brought their intellect, Hufflepuffs their resilience, Gryffindors their courage. And in this synergy, something greater than the sum of its parts emerged, a microcosm of a better Hogwarts where houses no longer divided but enriched each other. In one of the most telling moments, Cho Chang, another Ravenclaw, joined the DA. Her reasons were layered, a desire to stand against Umbridge, a connection to Cedric Diggory's memory, and perhaps a draw toward Harry himself. But her presence was no mere subplot of romance. It was political, emotional. Her participation, followed by Marietta Edgecombe's betrayal, gave weight to the dangers the DA faced. Cho believed in the movement enough to risk her friend's disapproval. She attended the meetings, cast spells, and joined the resistance. That matters. The films often erase these layers. What we see on screen is mostly a Gryffindor ensemble with token appearances from others. But the books tell a richer tale. When the list of DA members is confiscated by Umbridge, names from every house are present. The fallout affects the entire student body. The punishment is shared. So too is the legacy. In the final chapters of Deathly Hallows, as the battle lines are drawn, it is not only Gryffindors who return to defend Hogwarts, it is Ernie, Anthony, Padma. They do not need the spotlight to prove their worth. The success of Dumbledore's army wasn't that it built better Gryffindors. It was that it built better Hogwarts students. By learning together, they undid centuries of house rivalry. The 4 house tables in the Great Hall had long kept students apart. But the DA moved beyond that symbolism. In the Room of Requirement, they stood shoulder to shoulder. They learned disarming charms not just to pass exams, but to survive. They practiced Patronuses not as parlor tricks, but as shields against real darkness. And they did it together. This unity is best shown during the clandestine meetings, where members practiced in pairs, often crossing house lines. A Ravenclaw might help a Hufflepuff perfect a Jinx. A Gryffindor might explain wand movement to a Ravenclaw. These fleeting details, noted in Rowling's prose, build a picture of genuine inter-house cooperation. Susan Bones was doing stunning spells with Michael Corner, the book notes, a Hufflepuff and a Ravenclaw working side by side, with no trace of competition. Michael Corner himself, a Ravenclaw, joined initially alongside his girlfriend, Ginny Weasley. While their relationship had its ups and downs, his presence helped establish a bridge between the houses. He brought along Terry Boot and Anthony Goldstein. This ripple effect, one student drawing in another, is how movements grow. Michael's departure from Ginny did not mean his departure from the DA. That too is significant. Ginny Weasley, though a Gryffindor, often trained with students from other houses. She sparred with Padma, teamed with Susan. In many ways, Ginny embodied the inclusive spirit of the DA. She did not seek dominance but camaraderie. Her dueling prowess quickly matched her brother's, and she earned the respect of those around her, regardless of house. Even Luna Lovegood, perhaps the most beloved Ravenclaw in the series, brought her unique magic to the DA. Her unconventional worldview, often mocked by others, found welcome among the resistance. She had a dreamy look on her face, the book describes, but her spell hit the dummy squarely. Luna's belief in things unseen paralleled the group's belief in change. She wasn't just accepted, she was cherished. What the DA taught more than spells was trust. Trust in each other's abilities, trust across old boundaries. This was no small feat in a school that sorted 11-year-olds and kept them in near isolation for 7 years. Dumbledore's army challenged that system quietly but powerfully, not through declarations but through action, not with banners but with practiced dummies and whispered passwords. When Harry, Ron and Hermione leave Hogwarts in Deathly Hallows, the DA does not dissolve. It continues underground, led by Neville Longbottom and supported once again by students from Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw. Luna is among them. So is Ernie. They risk everything, facing brutal punishment, isolation, and the very real threat of death. This is not a Gryffindor tale, it is a Hogwarts tale. The Battle of Hogwarts is the culmination of the DA's legacy. As Voldemort's forces approach, it is the DA, not just Gryffindors, who rise to the defense. Padma and Parvati return. Terry Boot fights. Ernie Macmillan duels with Death Eaters. They don't seek glory, they seek justice. And in doing so, they rewrite what bravery means at Hogwarts. It's not about swordplay. It's about standing up when no one expects you to. It's about unity, even in chaos. The DA was more than a response to Umbridge. It was a vision of what Hogwarts could be. Not 4 separate houses, but one school united by common values. That vision, though often overlooked, is the true power behind Dumbledore's army. A Gryffindor may have lit the spark, but it took Ravenclaw's mind, Hufflepuff's heart, and Gryffindor's fire to keep it burning. And though the films condense this into a neat Gryffindor-centric montage, the books preserve a deeper truth. Real change is never the work of one house alone. It is built in secret rooms, practiced in whispered spells, and kept alive by students who believe, despite everything, that together they are stronger. Number 23, Hermione as the strategist. In the shadowy corners of Hogwarts during Harry's 5th year, a quiet revolution was brewing, not in the dungeons nor the high towers, but deep within the very essence of the school's student body. The defense against the dark arts class, once a bastion of strength and guidance, had become a hollow shell under Dolores Umbridge's icy rule. Yet from this darkness emerged a spark, and at the heart of that spark was not Harry Potter himself, but Hermione Granger, precise, methodical, and quietly calculating. Many remember her for her encyclopedic memory and her unfailing dedication to the rules. But when the rules themselves became instruments of oppression, Hermione did what few others dared. She pivoted. She bent the very order she once revered into a weapon against injustice. The birth of Dumbledore's army was not an act of youthful rebellion, it was an orchestrated operation, and Hermione Granger was its chief strategist. The Room of Requirement, that strange, sentient space within the castle, did not find them by accident. Hermione, always observant, had listened intently to Dobby's cryptic references and pieced together the puzzle long before anyone else took him seriously. While others were content to complain about Umbridge, Hermione took action. She knew they needed a place no one could discover, a place that could transform into exactly what they required. And so, under the pretense of coincidence, she led the group into the heart of their new base of operations. It was not improvisation, it was deliberate. More than just securing a location, Hermione's brilliance lay in how she anticipated the inevitable. She didn't simply hope the meetings would go unnoticed. She embedded safeguards into the very fabric of their organization. One of her most underappreciated contributions was the enchanted parchment she used to record the names of the members. It wasn't just for record-keeping, it was a deterrent, a strategic countermeasure. The enchantment she placed upon it was designed to mark any traitor. If you sign your name, she explained, you're making a magical vow. The spell was silent, invisible, yet potent. Later, when Marietta Edgecombe betrayed the group to Umbridge, the consequences were immediate and humiliating. Her face was covered in spots that formed the word sneak across her forehead, the book says. It was not a random curse, it was Hermione's foresight in action. Her caution was rooted in a deep understanding of human nature and magical lore. Unlike the brashness of Gryffindor or the impulsiveness of Harry, Hermione operated with an intellectual discipline reminiscent of Ravenclaw. She anticipated betrayal not because she was cynical, but because she was prepared. In every revolution there is the risk of collapse from within, and Hermione refused to let that happen. She also created the communication network used by the members of the DA. Using fake galleons, coins enchanted with protean charms, Hermione devised a secure method for announcing meetings. When the master coin's serial number changed, the others would reflect the update, effectively summoning the group without raising suspicion. This was not a casual spell. The protean charm was NEWT-level magic. Hermione had not only mastered it, but adapted it to serve their clandestine purposes. This use of high-level enchantment speaks volumes about her mindset. She wasn't just fighting back, she was planning a war. Even Fred and George, known for their reckless creativity, were in awe. "Blimey, Hermione," George said, as Harry later remembered. "I never knew you could do stuff like this." But of course, she could. She always could. It was simply that no one had seen the necessity for such tactics until now. Inside the Room of Requirement, their meetings were not just gatherings, they were drills, rehearsals, and lessons rooted in structure. Hermione insisted on order, attendance, and real progress. While Harry was the face of the movement, it was Hermione who demanded accountability. She recorded their spellwork, noted improvements, and even suggested training methods tailored to each member's strengths. For Neville, she encouraged repetitive practice with disarming spells. For Luna, she reinforced shield charms. Her approach was both personal and strategic. There was an instinct in her, something that could not be learned from books, a natural aptitude for leadership through design rather than charisma. Unlike Harry, who led with presence, Hermione led with systems. She constructed the DA like a military unit disguised as a study group. She respected each member's individuality while ensuring collective progress. And when challenges arose, it was often her solutions that saved the day. One might think Harry was the true leader, and in the emotional sense, he was. But Harry often acted on impulse. Hermione ensured those impulses had a framework to operate within. She was the net that caught his fall, the spine of the DA's durability. Without her, the organization might have crumbled under the first wave of scrutiny or betrayal. Consider the psychological environment of Hogwarts under Umbridge: fear, suspicion, and isolation. It was Hermione who gave them unity, a shared purpose. She was, in essence, a resistance architect. Every great rebellion needs one, not a warrior, but a mind that keeps the gears turning when chaos erupts. That was her. Even the decision to name the group Dumbledore's Army came from her strategic thinking. As the book notes, it was Hermione's idea to call the group Dumbledore's Army to make Umbridge think they were working for him. This was more than irony, it was subterfuge. The name itself was a weapon, misdirection aimed at Umbridge's paranoia. It worked. When the group was discovered, Umbridge turned on Dumbledore, allowing Harry and the others to avoid the brunt of her wrath for a time. Again, it was Hermione's calculated foresight that shaped the outcome. Moreover, Hermione's strength wasn't just in her planning, but in her restraint. While others wanted immediate retaliation or dramatic gestures, Hermione understood the value of subtlety. She waited, she watched, She prepared. Her control was her strength, and her strength ensured survival. She never sought credit. In fact, much of her contribution is swallowed in the narrative because she did not broadcast her work. While Harry received the attention, Hermione was content to be the brain behind the curtain. But without that brain, the curtain would have fallen. Even after the group was exposed and scattered, it was Hermione who encouraged the preservation of the DA's ideals. She believed in what they had created, not just as a method of self-defense, but as a symbol of hope. She understood that resistance wasn't just about fighting back physically, it was about refusing to surrender one's mind, one's values. The DA was her way of telling the wizarding world, we are still thinking, we are still learning, we are not broken. Later, when the trio went into hiding, these same qualities made Hermione indispensable. She planned their movements, packed the magical bag with essential supplies, and anticipated nearly every logistical challenge. The qualities she refined during the DA's formation became the survival tools they needed on the run. It wasn't coincidence, it was evolution. Even in the darkest moments, when the trio was cold, hungry, and directionless, it was Hermione's organization that kept them moving. She wasn't perfect. She could be rigid, overcautious, and emotionally distant. But she was necessary. She was the infrastructure behind their resistance. The DA was just the beginning. It is also important to note the moral clarity with which she acted. Hermione's strategies were not rooted in ambition or ego. They were born from principle. She knew what was right and was willing to risk everything to defend it. Even when it meant challenging authority, losing house points, or putting herself in danger, she never hesitated. The true depth of her strategy came not just in her spells or logistics, but in how she prepared others to lead. She didn't hoard knowledge, she shared it. She empowered Neville, Ginny, Luna, and others to take initiative. She recognized that a true resistance must be sustainable, must survive, even if its founders are captured or lost. That's how real movements endure. That's how legacies are built. In the final battle, many of the DA's core fighters emerged as heroes, not because of brute strength, but because of the foundation laid during those meetings in the room of requirement. The muscle was Harry's, but the skeleton, that was Hermione's. To understand Dumbledore's army without recognizing Hermione's role is to see only the surface of the rebellion. Her work was not loud, but it was precise, not flashy, but foundational. While others wielded wands, she wielded structure, and that, perhaps more than any incantation, is what made the DA last. The books never explicitly call her a strategist. There are no medals or grand titles, but make no mistake, without Hermione Granger, there would have been no army, only a collection of frightened students waiting for someone else to act. Instead, they acted together, and that began with her. Number 24. Harry's emotional speech. Of all the moments lost in translation from the page to the screen, few are as emotionally potent or as underestimated as Harry Potter's first honest speech to the would-be members of Dumbledore's army in the Order of the Phoenix. In the film, the scene is brief and lacks the gravity it was given in the book, but in the dim, smoky back room of the Hog's Head pub, something quietly profound took place in J.K. Rowling's original text, something that redefined Harry not as the chosen one, but as a person. It was a moment of bare emotion, of unscripted truth, and it became the turning point for an entire generation of young witches and wizards who needed something real to believe in. When Hermione first suggested the idea of Harry teaching them defense against the dark arts, he recoiled. He didn't see himself as a teacher or a leader, only as someone who had been pulled into situations beyond his control. As the group of students began to gather in the Hog's Head, Cho Chang, Neville Longbottom, the Patil twins, Dean Thomas, Lavender Brown, and others, Harry felt increasingly uncomfortable. They weren't there just to learn spells. They were there because of him. And he hated it. He hated the weight of their expectant gazes. It felt like being displayed behind a glass window labeled "The Boy Who Lived," and that label more than anything made his skin crawl. In the book, the moment isn't flashy, there's no dramatic music, no spotlight, just Harry standing awkwardly shoved into the center of the room as the crowd waits. "Well," he says, "I don't know why you're here." And it's true, he doesn't. He admits it out loud. He isn't their hero. He doesn't want to be. What follows is not a recruitment speech, it's a confession. He begins to recount the moments everyone whispers about, but no one truly understands. He talks about surviving the Triwizard Tournament, about watching Cedric Diggory die, but he doesn't brag, he relives. And in reliving, he exposes the weight of those memories. He doesn't give them a rehearsed list of achievements. He talks about fear, about the way it wraps around your chest and makes it hard to breathe, about the seconds before you cast a spell when your hand shakes and your mind screams that you're about to die. He strips down every grand myth about his past until all that remains is a 16-year-old boy who did what he had to do. "I've been lucky," he says. "I've had help." That line lands with weight because that's the truth that no one in the wizarding world seems to acknowledge. Harry Potter didn't survive because he was exceptional. He survived because he wasn't alone. And the room listens. In the movie, this is reduced to murmurs and a few nods, but in the book, this speech reshapes the entire group. Cho Chang doesn't fall for the legend that day. She begins to care for the boy who spoke with pain in his voice. Ernie Macmillan, a Hufflepuff known for his loud certainty, stands silent with new respect. Even Zachariah Smith, who had arrived full of doubt and cynicism, quiets his tongue because in that smoky, cramped room, they see that Harry isn't selling them a dream. He's showing them a reality they're already a part of. A war is coming, and he's been there, and he's still here. There's a specific moment in the book that lays this transformation bare. After Harry finishes speaking, there is no cheer, no dramatic moment of unanimous decision. There's only a shift, a slow, powerful shift. There was a silence in which every member of the group seemed to be absorbing what he had just said. Then slowly, very slowly, hands began to rise into the air. That quote is the heartbeat of the entire chapter, not because it's triumphant, but because it's human. These students didn't sign up for glory. They signed up because they recognized their own fears in Harry's voice, and they saw that fear didn't mean weakness, it meant readiness. The change in Neville Longbottom is especially powerful. Neville, whose parents had been tortured into madness by Bellatrix Lestrange, sat in that room and heard Harry speak not just of triumph, but of trauma. And in that shared pain, something hardened in him. He would later become one of the most courageous members of the Dumbledore's army, and ultimately the one to destroy the final Horcrux in Voldemort's snake, Nagini. But it started here, with a boy who felt just as broken as Harry did. That's the kind of detail the films couldn't possibly hold in their limited runtime, but in the books it's a seed that grows into resistance. What Rowling did with that speech was subtle, but extraordinary. She gave Harry the voice not of a leader by destiny, but of a leader by honesty. He didn't ask anyone to follow him. He told them what it cost. And then he let them decide. The significance of that choice can't be overstated. For many in that room, this was the first time they were being asked to act without adult supervision, without a clear reward, and they said yes, not to a hero, but to a peer, to someone who stood before them and said, "I'm scared too, but we still have to act." In his speech, Harry also dismantles the idea of perfection. He doesn't pretend to have all the answers. He says plainly that he's made mistakes, that he barely knows what he's doing. "I'm not even that good," he admits. And the humility in that moment is a mirror to their own insecurities. Every student who had doubted their place in this fight suddenly saw that you didn't need to be brilliant. You needed to be brave. And bravery didn't look like charging into battle. It looked like raising your hand in a quiet pub and saying, "I'm in." There's something hauntingly beautiful in the way that scene unfolds. It's not about magic, it's about belief. Harry doesn't cast a single spell. But by the end of it, he's accomplished something that even Dumbledore struggled to do. He's united them, not through charisma, not through prophecy, but through truth. And that's the kind of leadership that sustains through war. That's the foundation upon which Dumbledore's army is built, not flashy spells, but shared vulnerability. Even Hermione, who orchestrated the meeting, watches with quiet awe. She had always believed in Harry's abilities, but this was different. This wasn't about logic or talent. This was about conviction. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that Harry wasn't just the figurehead of their rebellion. He was its moral center. And when Ron nudged Harry after the meeting, grinning in disbelief at the number of sign-ups, Harry didn't smile. He looked tired, not physically but emotionally, because speaking that truth had cost him something. And that's why it mattered. What's most tragic is that the film adaptation flattens this complexity. The movie turns the gathering into a casual meeting. The nervous tension, the shifting glances, the silent calculations, gone. The emotional texture is lost, and with it, the audience loses a vital understanding of what it means to choose resistance. In the book, it's not a montage of teenagers practicing spells. It's a slow build toward solidarity. Every wand raised in that room afterward is a promise, not a performance. The students didn't just want to learn from Harry, they wanted to stand with him. That distinction is crucial. It's what made the Dumbledore's army more than just a club. It made it a movement. And movements don't start with declarations. They start with doubt and with someone willing to voice it. Harry's speech is filled with doubt, but that's why it resonates. It's real. And in a world where the ministry was spreading lies and fear, that realness was revolutionary. One might argue that this moment was the most important turning point for Harry himself. Up until that chapter, he had been reacting, surviving, stumbling, lashing out. But for the first time, he stands still and speaks not as a student, but as someone who has seen what's coming and refuses to let others walk into it blind. That's when he stops being a pawn in the game. That's when he becomes a player. And it all starts in a shabby room above a pub with no fanfare, no headline, just truth. We see the ripples of that speech throughout the rest of the series. Luna Lovegood's unwavering support, Ginny Weasley's sharp determination, even Lavender Brown, who many dismissed as frivolous, fights in the Battle of Hogwarts. These weren't natural soldiers, they were students, children, but children who had heard something that made them believe they could fight back. And that belief didn't come from Dumbledore, it came from Harry. It is also no coincidence that the setting for this speech is the Hog's Head, a place of shadows, rumours and secrets, a place run by Aberforth Dumbledore, who himself had a complicated relationship with truth and leadership. There, in that unglamorous corner of Hogsmeade, the resistance began, not with wands, but with words, not with triumph, but with trembling honesty. And that's what made it powerful. When history remembers Dumbledore's army, it often recalls their final stand, their acts of courage in the room of requirement, their defiance at Hogwarts. But the real beginning, the soul of the army, was born in that one speech. That one moment when Harry stepped into the role fate had always whispered about. Not as a saviour, but as a storyteller of his own scars. That's why the omission in the film feels so devastating, because the viewer loses not just a scene, but a shift, a revelation, a redefinition. The Harry we see in the books is never more human than in that moment, and the Dumbledore's army is never more unified than when they realise he's just like them, that he bleeds, that he breaks, and still he stands. That speech matters. It's not a footnote, it's not filler, it's the moment when courage moved from myth to reality, when students chose to fight, not because they were ready, but because they were not. And in that tension, in that terrifying leap of faith, Dumbledore's army was born, not from legend, but from truth. Number 25. Lavender Brown and affections inside the Dumbledore's army. There are countless tales within the hallowed halls of Hogwarts that were never fully explored in the films. Among them lies a quiet, almost forgotten thread, the emotional entanglements that developed inside Dumbledore's army, also known simply as the DA. These secret meetings were more than just lessons in defensive spells. They became crucibles of loyalty, companionship, and adolescent affection, often hidden beneath the pressing urgency of war. Lavender Brown, often remembered only for her brief romance with Ron Weasley, had a subtler and more poignant role in this hidden chapter of Hogwarts' resistance. Her hesitant journey into the DA is a small, often overlooked story, one that mirrors the path of many students who initially doubted, feared, or misunderstood the fight against the rising darkness. When Hermione Granger first proposed the idea of a secret defense group, Lavender wasn't immediately enthusiastic. In Order of the Phoenix, Lavender and Parvati Patil were portrayed as eager gossipers, fascinated more by divination and romantic drama than clandestine resistance. Lavender, in particular, had placed more faith in the Daily Prophet than in Harry's warnings. After all, the newspaper was still the primary voice of the wizarding world, and it was shouting that Harry was unstable, dangerous, and seeking attention. For Lavender, whose life had been relatively sheltered and ordinary, this made sense. It wasn't easy to believe that the Ministry of Magic could lie, or that a teenager could be more truthful than the government. But Hogwarts was changing. The arrival of Dolores Umbridge brought an oppressive stillness to the corridors, a sense of being watched, judged, and silenced. Lavender, along with many others, began to feel the shift. The moment that began to shake her certainty came not in a classroom, but in the common room, late at night. After overhearing Seamus Finnegan argue with Dean Thomas about Harry's credibility, Lavender grew quiet. She didn't join in. She was watching and listening. She had known Seamus all her life. If he was beginning to doubt the official narrative, then perhaps there was more to Harry's story than she had allowed herself to believe. It wasn't until Parvati returned from a DA meeting one evening, her cheeks flushed with excitement, that Lavender's interest deepened. Parvati described the meeting not just in terms of spells or lessons, but in terms of courage and energy. There was something electric about the DA, something that couldn't be found in Umbridge's dull, dictatorial lectures. Lavender, curious but cautious, followed Parvati the next time. It's never clearly stated in the book when Lavender joined, but by Christmas she was attending regularly. Her presence was subtle, but it was there, in the room of requirement, among the crowd of students pushing themselves to master nonverbal spells, shield charms, and disarming techniques. There she was just another student among many, but something had shifted. There was a reason students kept coming back to those secret meetings despite the risk. In the room of requirement, the walls were covered with cushions, the candles flickered with a gentle warmth, and Harry's voice carried both command and humility. Lavender had never looked at Harry that way before. He wasn't the boy who lived anymore. He was a classmate, a leader, someone shouldering the weight of a world that refused to listen. And standing beside him, always attentive, was Ron. Ron Weasley, who had often been a blur in the background of her school days, now seemed sharper, steadier. There was something appealing in the way he threw himself into each lesson, sometimes clumsy, sometimes brilliant, but always brave. Romance in the DA didn't spark like fireworks. It simmered in quiet glances and shared smiles. The DA was a pressure cooker. The more they practiced, the more they bled, laughed, and trembled together. The line between fear and fondness blurred. Lavender found herself watching Ron as he practiced the Expelliarmus charm, his wand movements erratic but determined. During one practice, Ron stumbled backward, tripping over a cushion, and landed inches from her. She laughed, and he blushed. It wasn't much, but it stayed with her. The book describes the DA meetings as moments of transformation. It was as though they had all been drowning and Dumbledore's army had given them back the ability to breathe. That line captures what Lavender began to feel. The more she attended, the more the fog of confusion and fear began to lift. She started to trust her instincts rather than what the prophet said. In that space, free from teachers' scrutiny, she learned not only spells but confidence. The DA gave her the power to be someone more than just a giggling girl in divination class. One of the key turning points came during a practice duel. Harry had set up students to pair off, and Lavender ended up facing Ron. It was awkward at first, both of them too self-conscious to cast with proper focus. But the laughter between them was genuine, and the moment broke the usual tension. Ron gave her a slight bow after the match, a theatrical gesture that made her grin. From that point on, they sought each other's company during practices more often, sometimes even walking back from meetings together under Harry's invisibility cloak when danger heightened. This small budding friendship, or perhaps attraction, was never loudly declared, but the signs were there. Later in the book, when Ron is injured during Quidditch practice, Lavender shows concern. Her exaggerated affections later in Half-Blood Prince may seem comedic, but the roots of her feelings possibly began during those quiet evenings in the Room of Requirement, when bravery became contagious and walls between students began to fall. Neville Longbottom too noticed these changes. He once confided to Harry that he felt like he belonged for the first time. Lavender wasn't so different. The DA was not just a defense group, it was a family. In a school where danger lurked behind every corner and the ministry watched like a hawk, this hidden fellowship became their sanctuary. Lavender, who once scoffed at the idea of rebellion, now stood beside Luna Lovegood, Ernie Macmillan, and Ginny Weasley, casting shield charms with fierce determination. Her transformation mirrors that of many others in the DA. Even Zacharias Smith, reluctant and skeptical, eventually showed improvement. Lavender, though never depicted as one of the DA's stars, embodied what the organization stood for: courage blooming in ordinary hearts. She was not exceptional, but she showed up. She trained. She chose a side. Ron never seemed fully aware of Lavender's growing attention during the 5th year, but others noticed. Ginny, perceptive as always, mentioned once that Ron wouldn't know a girl fancied him if she painted herself purple and danced naked in front of him. Though meant as a joke, it reflected the subtle dynamics within the DA. Emotions stirred just below the surface. Affection, rivalry, jealousy, they all bubbled in quiet ways, often unnoticed by those in the center. What's compelling is how the DA meetings amplified these connections. Under normal school conditions, Lavender and Ron may have never spoken beyond casual greetings. But in the DA, survival depended on trust, on standing together, on cheering each other on when a Patronus flickered weakly or a stunning spell missed its mark. Lavender began to see Ron not as a background character, but as someone she could admire. By the time 6th year rolled around, Lavender's feelings had intensified. Though the actual romance with Ron would not blossom until then, what makes this interesting is the groundwork that was laid during DA meetings. It's easy to see Lavender's 6th year infatuation as sudden or superficial, but perhaps it was built slowly in those candle-lit sessions, surrounded by fear and hope and determination. The DA also served as a mirror. It showed the best and worst of everyone. Some rose, others faltered. Lavender, who once followed gossip like scripture, now questioned authority. She became someone who, despite her dramatic flair, knew what it meant to resist. This arc is subtle but powerful, proof of how even the most underestimated students grew into warriors, allies, and believers. Lavender's role in the Battle of Hogwarts, though brief, becomes all the more significant in this light. She fought. She returned to the castle when it mattered most. Whether or not she survived is left ambiguous in the books, but her courage is unquestionable. She was no longer a girl chasing predictions. She was someone who had made a choice. The DA was never just about fighting. It was about becoming. It turned fearful students into spellcasters, skeptics into believers, acquaintances into friends. Lavender Brown was one of its quiet successes, a reminder that not all transformations happen in grand moments. Some happen in shy glances across the room, in laughter shared over bruised knees, in whispered, "Well done," after a perfectly cast charm. In the end, the Room of Requirement gave them what they needed most. For Lavender, it was clarity, a space where she could choose her path, where fear could be confronted, and where her heart could bloom, just a little, under the shadow of war. Her story is stitched quietly into the greater tapestry of the DA. But if you look closely, it's there. The girl who doubted, then believed. The girl who laughed, then fought. The girl who found courage not in prophecy but in the warmth of others. Lavender Brown's journey through the DA is a reminder that the heart of a resistance is not built only on spells, but on the fragile, precious ties between people. Those ties, those glances, affections, fears, and loyalties were as much a part of their defense as any jinx or shield charm. And perhaps when the war ended, it was these invisible threads that held the survivors together. Number 26, Why Dumbledore Stayed Silent. Of all the mysteries that haunted Harry Potter in his 5th year at Hogwarts, none cut deeper than the silence of Albus Dumbledore. As the headmaster, who had once been his trusted guide, protector, and even a father figure, Dumbledore's sudden distance in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix felt like abandonment. While battles raged within the walls of Hogwarts and the Ministry spread lies, Harry was left to face uncertainty alone, tormented by dreams he couldn't control and questions no one would answer. The films showed Dumbledore's detachment, but failed to truly explore the why. The books, however, whispered a subtle truth. Dumbledore's silence was not neglect, but the ultimate act of protection, a tragic love shaped by foresight and sacrifice. When Harry and his friends formed Dumbledore's army in secret, a rebellious act of defiance against the Ministry's suffocating grip, Dumbledore's name was invoked as a banner of hope. Ironically, the man himself had never endorsed it, never joined the conversation, and never offered so much as a word of encouragement. His silence seemed cold. It wounded Harry deeply, compounding his feelings of isolation. "He doesn't look at me anymore," Harry observed bitterly in the book. Dumbledore, who had once looked upon him with warmth and wisdom, now turned his eyes away. But this was no mistake. It was deliberate, calculated, and it stemmed from something darker than mistrust. By the end of the 4th book, The Goblet of Fire, Voldemort had returned to power, and Dumbledore knew that the connection between Harry and the Dark Lord was no longer symbolic. It was literal, a thread of shared soul, a fragment of Voldemort himself living inside Harry. This bond was more than magical, it was dangerous. As Harry began experiencing visions of Voldemort's actions and emotions, Dumbledore realized that the enemy had found a way to slip into Harry's thoughts, and if Voldemort could see into Harry's mind, then he could also see through Harry's eyes. It was this horrifying possibility that led Dumbledore to make one of the most painful decisions of his life. He would remove himself from Harry's daily world. He would become cold and unreachable, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. "I have watched you more closely than you could have imagined," Dumbledore later confesses, but from a distance, in silence, in sorrow. The headmaster feared that his presence, his kindness, could become a beacon for Voldemort's attention. If Voldemort sensed the affection Dumbledore felt, or the plans he was making, he might exploit that bond to manipulate or destroy Harry entirely. Dumbledore's strategy was not shared with anyone, not even Professor McGonagall. His secrecy added layers to the misunderstanding. Harry, already reeling from Cedric Diggory's death and haunted by nightmares, was left to flounder. The Ministry's lies painted him as unbalanced and fame-hungry. Even his classmates questioned his sanity. Yet Dumbledore remained distant, never stepping in to restore Harry's credibility. The pain of this silence cut deeper than any insult from Draco Malfoy or scolding from Professor Umbridge. It was betrayal, cloaked in love. The creation of Dumbledore's army, or the DA, as students affectionately called it, was a turning point. It gave students agency, it gave them power, and it gave them something Voldemort never wanted them to have: hope. Ironically, it was inspired by the very man who wasn't even part of the room. Harry led the meetings. Hermione organized them. Neville blossomed within them, but Dumbledore never interfered. He never praised, he never punished. He stayed absent, letting the fire grow without fanning the flame. For the students, it was an act of defiance. For Dumbledore, it was a necessary risk, one he could not endorse publicly without drawing deadly attention. When the inquisitorial squad, led by the insufferable Draco Malfoy, eventually uncovered the DA's secret meetings, it was Marietta Edgecombe's betrayal that unraveled it all. Cornelius Fudge stormed Hogwarts, eager to charge Dumbledore with inciting rebellion. In a powerful and theatrical moment, Dumbledore took the blame for the group's formation. "You seem to be laboring under the delusion that I am going to—" "What is the phrase? Come quietly," he said, eyes twinkling with fire. He vanished in a blaze of phoenix flames, sparing Harry from punishment and turning himself into a fugitive. Once again, Dumbledore sacrificed his safety for the sake of Harry's future. And still, he said nothing. Behind the silence lay a deeper personal guilt. Dumbledore's relationship with power had always been fraught. The death of his sister Ariana had scarred him. He had once sought power for noble ends and lost everything. He saw in Harry a second chance, not for himself, but for the world. And he feared that by loving the boy too much, by interfering too closely, he would once again destroy what he meant to protect. "I cared more for your happiness than your knowing the truth," he tells Harry at the end of Order of the Phoenix. But truth and happiness could not coexist, not in wartime. There is a moment in the book that passes quickly but holds enormous weight, when Harry, tormented by visions and rage, smashes Dumbledore's possessions in his office. Dumbledore simply lets him. He does not raise his voice. He does not defend himself. He watches the boy break, silently, waiting. Only after Harry's fury subsides does Dumbledore explain, "I am not worried, Harry, I am with you." It is then that the curtain lifts, and the boy who had felt abandoned finally sees the old man's pain. And the reader understands Dumbledore's silence was a shield. One of the cruelest ironies is that Harry had believed himself unloved during those months. In reality, he was never more protected. Dumbledore's restraint was the most profound act of love he could muster. To step away, to remain silent while watching someone suffer, it is a different kind of bravery. It is the bravery of those who know that comfort can kill, that presence can expose, and that sometimes the best way to save someone is to leave them alone. The films captured only a fragment of this sorrow. Michael Gambon's Dumbledore was stern, even aloof, lacking the warmth that Richard Harris once brought to the role. The cinematic Dumbledore appeared distant without explanation. He became a background figure, a shadow in the chaos rather than a man silently enduring torment. The richness of Rowling's text was lost in the editing room, replaced with vague glances and cold lines. The viewer, unfamiliar with the books, might well believe that Dumbledore had simply lost interest in the boy he had once mentored, but Rowling left breadcrumbs for the attentive. She painted Dumbledore not as perfect, but as deeply flawed, wise, but scarred by his past. His silence was never about ignorance. It was about restraint, about learning from mistakes he could never undo. And in Harry's growing independence, in his leadership of the DA, Dumbledore saw hope. The boy who once waited for orders was now forging his own path. That was the victory Dumbledore could never claim as his own, but one he had quietly cultivated through absence. In the room of requirement, as spells flew and friendships deepened, Harry became what Dumbledore had hoped, a leader born not of command, but of choice. The army was not Dumbledore's, not really. It was Harry's, shaped by pain, strengthened by faith, and inspired by an ideal. Dumbledore's name was its banner, but his silence was its fuel. By refusing to interfere, he allowed the rebellion to be real, not orchestrated. That choice would echo through the Battle of Hogwarts, where every DA member stood and fought, not because they were told to, but because they believed. In the Department of Mysteries, when the connection between Harry and Voldemort was finally weaponized, Dumbledore's fears proved true. Voldemort lured Harry into a trap by exploiting the boy's emotions, his desire to save Sirius. It nearly destroyed them all. Only then did Dumbledore speak openly. "I should have told you 5 years ago," he admitted. The confession came too late, but its weight was undeniable. Silence had saved Harry, but it had also wounded him. That is the tragedy of strategy. As readers, we often yearn for heroes who speak, who explain, who embrace. Dumbledore was not that kind of hero. He was the one who stood on the edge, who bore the burden alone, who watched from afar. His love was distant, his wisdom often painful. But in hindsight, it becomes clear he was always there, watching, guiding, suffering. And in his silence lay 1,000 unsaid words, 1,000 unshown tears. To understand Dumbledore's silence is to understand the cost of leadership in times of darkness. Not all protection is loud, not all love is visible, and not all sacrifices are recognized when they are made. Dumbledore's distance in Harry's 5th year was not failure. It was foresight. and in the end it forged Harry into the only kind of warrior who could truly defeat Voldemort, one who chose to fight, not because he was told to, but because he knew it was right. That is the secret the films barely whispered, but the books cried out. That is the truth behind the silence. Number 27. Consequences for Dumbledore's army members. In the shadowy corridors of Hogwarts during Harry Potter's 5th year, a quiet rebellion had formed. It was called Dumbledore's Army, or the Dumbledore's Army for short, a secret student group organized in defiance of the tyrannical rule of Dolores Umbridge, who had taken control of the school as High Inquisitor. The group was led by Harry himself, but it was far more than just a few meetings in the Room of Requirement. It became a symbol of resistance. However, what is rarely discussed, and often glossed over in film adaptations, are the severe and long-lasting consequences that the members of Dumbledore's army faced after their group was exposed. In the movie, the danger seems fleeting, the threat evaporating like mist. But in the books, the reality was far grimmer. When the existence of Dumbledore's army was revealed, it sent a shockwave through the school. Marietta Edgecombe's betrayal was the spark that lit the fire, though she herself paid a heavy price for her treachery. Hermione's clever curse ensured that. Yet what followed wasn't just disciplinary action from the administration, it was a campaign of targeted harassment. Dolores Umbridge, emboldened by her appointment as headmistress, wielded her authority like a blunt instrument. She made it her mission to hunt down, isolate, and punish anyone remotely associated with the Dumbledore's army. Her vision was clear: crush the spirit of resistance by making examples of the brave. Katie Bell, a skilled Quidditch player and a loyal Gryffindor, was one of the first to face Umbridge's wrath. Though Katie had always been known for her discipline and cheerful demeanor, Umbridge zeroed in on her simply for attending the meetings. She was dragged into a long, intimidating session in Umbridge's office, a room where the walls were lined with plates of meowing kittens, a disturbingly saccharine contrast to the psychological torment that took place inside. Katie never spoke of the interrogation in detail, but her friends noticed how quiet she became afterwards. Her performance on the Quidditch field faltered. She had been rattled, visibly, deeply. Padma Patil, one of the Ravenclaws who had joined the Dumbledore's army, fared little better. Unlike her more outspoken sister Parvati, Padma was reserved and precise, always careful with her words, but even her careful nature could not shield her from Umbridge's suspicion. After the group's discovery, Padma was made to report daily to Filch under vague pretenses of re-education. These sessions were meant to be humiliating, cleaning trophy rooms without magic, memorizing ministry decrees by heart, writing lines under supervision. It was not just punishment, it was indoctrination. Yet Padma never once denied her involvement or named any other member. She stood her ground with quiet resolve. Perhaps one of the most chilling examples was what happened to Susan Bones, a Hufflepuff whose aunt, Amelia Bones, worked at the Ministry of Magic. Susan had hoped that her family connections might shield her. They didn't. In fact, her family's known sympathies toward Dumbledore may have made her more of a target. Umbridge viewed Susan as a symbol, a way to reach into the Ministry's heart and remind everyone who was truly in control. Susan was summoned and questioned at length, repeatedly asked to denounce Harry, to admit that Dumbledore was assembling child soldiers. She refused. "Harry is teaching us to defend ourselves, not attack," she said, as noted in Order of the Phoenix. Her defiance made her days at school more miserable than most could imagine. Even the younger members of the group weren't spared. Colin Creevey, always wide-eyed and enthusiastic, faced detentions that left his hands trembling. He had joined the Dumbledore's army with the wide-eyed admiration of someone who believed in heroes, but when Umbridge got wind of his name on the list, she took special delight in mocking him for his fanboy loyalty to Potter. He was forced to hand-copy entire sections of defensive magical theory, the dull, useless textbook chosen by Umbridge, and write essays condemning Harry as a dangerous element. But Colin never turned in the essays. He accepted the punishment in silence, ink-stained and exhausted, refusing to betray what he believed in. Dean Thomas, a Gryffindor with a strong moral compass, also came under scrutiny. He had always been vocal in support of Harry, and his participation in the Dumbledore's army was no secret. After the group's exposure, Dean found himself targeted not just by Umbridge, but by several teachers who sought to curry favour with her. He was denied permission slips, barred from extracurricular activities, and assigned extra essays designed to sap his time and energy. His artistic talents, previously encouraged by Professor Flitwick, were dismissed as a distraction from proper magical learning. Still he persisted, often helping Neville with his wand work in secret, refusing to let the Dumbledore's army's disbandment mean the end of what they stood for. But the greatest testament to the group's resilience came from its most unlikely member, Neville Longbottom. Neville had joined the Dumbledore's army as a shy, unsure boy with a shaky wand grip. By the end, he was a fierce and competent dueler. After the group was discovered, Neville bore his punishment with silent strength. Umbridge loathed him, both for his improvement and for his family legacy. As the son of tortured auras, Neville represented a kind of defiance that Umbridge could not tame. She targeted him with disdain, reducing his marks, calling him simple-minded in front of others. But Neville didn't flinch. He became a rock, a centre of calm for other Dumbledore's army members. Neville had improved beyond all recognition, the book tells us, and that growth didn't vanish after the group ended. It took root in him, and it stayed. Luna Lovegood, serene and strange, was another target. Though her dreamy demeanour gave the illusion that nothing could touch her, Luna was not spared from the punishments. Umbridge considered her disturbing, often referring to her in reports as a delusional element within Ravenclaw House. Luna's belongings were searched, her beliefs mocked, and her loyalty questioned. Yet Luna never betrayed any secrets. In fact, when asked whether she regretted joining the Dumbledore's army, she simply said, "It was important." She wore her exclusion like armour. Her belief in Harry and in the cause was unshakable. Ginny Weasley, ever fierce and bold, retaliated in her own way. After the group dissolved, she didn't step away quietly. She increased her participation in the Gryffindor Quidditch team, taking up the seeker role after Harry's ban. She used the field to send a message that the fight wasn't over. When questioned by Umbridge, Ginny refused to answer directly, once stating that students are allowed to form study groups. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't an answer either. Her sharp wit kept her from harsher punishments, but Ginny knew she was walking a fine line. Still, she never showed fear. She kept her head high, red hair blazing like a banner. Zacharias Smith, who had always been sceptical of Harry, surprised everyone by not betraying the group. Though never the most beloved member, Zacharias had seen real value in the training they received. After the Dumbledore's army was exposed, many assumed he would save himself by turning on the others, but he didn't. He kept his silence. His attitude may have been annoying, but his loyalty, however reluctant, was real. It was a quiet redemption arc, one that was never fully explored in the movies, but one that speaks volumes about the culture of trust that Harry had fostered.